Chapter 149. A few days later, a carriage pulled by 2 horses drove out of the Fergus family castle. More than 3 hours later, they drove into a majestic city and stopped in front of a huge auction hall. They were led to one of the private rooms. The Rock family didn't come to pay a visit. Although the Rock family also came, because of Hanu's matter, the 2 families had already shed all pretense of cordiality. Naturally, they couldn't maintain their previous friendliness. After lunch, a beautiful woman with black curly hair walked up to the auction stage and the auction began. One item after another was auctioned off. The noble families in the private rooms on the 2nd floor didn't move. They hadn't encountered anything that could move them. The 7th item, the Blue Moon. It was personally designed and made by Master Feng Manju. The starting price is 1 gold coin. This was a string of sapphire bracelets, made up of dozens of sapphires. The largest sapphire was a moon-shaped sapphire, beautiful and eye-catching. In the auction hall, under the illumination of the rune lamps, it flickered with a magnificent radiance. 1 gold coin, 30 silver coins. 1 gold coin, 60 silver coins. 2 gold coins. 2 gold coins, 20 silver coins. The price rose quickly. There were many noble ladies and young ladies who liked this bracelet. So beautiful. Even Sarah, who was beside Gray, couldn't help but reveal a look of love in her eyes. Gray looked at the other party and suddenly frowned. The other party's hands were empty. There wasn't a single piece of jewelry on her body. Because of Gray, Sarah wasn't bullied by anyone in the Fergus castle. No one dared to bully her, but that was it. After all, she was only an illegitimate daughter. She didn't show any advantages like Gray did. In terms of treatment, compared to Caroline, she was still a little worse. At least now, Caroline had necklaces and bracelets on both her hands and neck. Moreover, they weren't the only ones she had. Gray had seen more than 3 of them. It wasn't that Gray hadn't noticed this in the past. Although he was highly favored by Viscount Fergus, he had no source of income. But now, 11 gold coins and 30 silver coins. Anyone else? The black-haired woman with curly red lips and a slender waist asked with a smile. Since there are no more bidders, I announce 12 gold coins. At this moment, a slightly cold voice sounded. Hearing this voice, the wavy black-haired woman couldn't help but be stunned because this voice came from the private room on the 2nd floor. Those who were able to sit in the private rooms on the 2nd floor were all aristocratic families, and their titles were not too low. At the very least, they were barons. As for the aristocratic families, they could only apologize as there were special seats on the 1st floor. With such a status, it was rare for him to participate in the early stages of the auction. Who would have thought that he would participate in this auction? Although she was slightly stunned, the black-haired woman did not let anyone notice it on the surface. She spoke very naturally. 12 gold coins, anyone else? On the 1st floor, the noblewoman who had bid 11 gold coins and 30 silver coins gritted her teeth and increased the price. 12 gold coins and 10 silver coins. However, just as she was about to bid, the cold voice rang out again. 13 gold coins. 13 gold coins, anyone else? The black-haired woman smiled. The noblewoman who had bid before hesitated for a moment before shaking her head and giving up on the auction. With the financial resources of her aristocratic family, more than 10 gold coins was not a small expenditure. She really liked this sapphire bracelet, otherwise she wouldn't have bid 12 gold coins and 10 silver coins. The current bidding price had already exceeded her psychological tolerance. Although she liked it very much, she could only give up. Congratulations, this Azure Moon bracelet has been won by Private Room 3. Next, let's welcome the 8th auction item, Private Room 3, which was the private room where the Fergus family was seated, had a subtle atmosphere when Gray participated in the auction. Everyone couldn't help but look at Gray in confusion. Everyone could hear the slight dissatisfaction in Gray's voice. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, there was a knock on the door and a voice sounded. Sir, the 7th auction item has been delivered. Do you want to send it in or wait for it to be settled? Send it in. Gray opened his mouth and saw a woman whose skirt only reached her knees push open the door and enter with a tray in her hands. Gray waved his hand and handed her 13 gold coins. He then took out the Azure Moon bracelet from the tray and spoke to Sarah beside him. I forgot to prepare a birthday present for you last time. This Azure Moon bracelet is for you. For me? Sarah subconsciously took the Azure Moon bracelet with a face full of surprise and joy. Although she had already guessed when Gray was bidding, she was still filled with surprise when Gray handed the bracelet to her. Thank you, brother. Clasping the Azure Moon bracelet on her left hand, Sarah's face bloomed with a blissful smile. Although she was very satisfied with Gray's gift. Just when Gray handed the bracelet to Sarah, Madame de Milan couldn't help but let out a thump, and her heart sank slightly. As the wife, it was naturally impossible for her to see the children of her husband's lover. However, Gray's talent was too outstanding and was highly valued by Viscount Fergus, so she didn't dare to play tricks on Gray. But Sarah was different. She didn't show any outstanding performance and naturally couldn't be valued by Viscount Fergus like Gray. Therefore, she treated Sarah less in some aspects, at least not as well as Caroline. At this moment, although Gray didn't say anything, he pointed it out in front of Viscount Fergus with his actions and showed his dissatisfaction. She had a bad feeling in her heart. Sure enough, in the next moment, she had already heard Viscount Fergus's voice. After we return, buy a few sets of jewelry for Sarah. His voice didn't carry a tone of discussion, but was completely commanding. Viscount Fergus was obviously dissatisfied with her differential treatment. Yes, master. Madame de Milan hurriedly replied. Viscount Fergus glanced at his wife and didn't say anything more. However, he was really a little annoyed in his heart. In his opinion, his wife's way of doing things was simply too short-sighted. Indeed, in a noble family, if an ordinary illegitimate child had food and clothing, this kind of treatment was already enough. But was Sarah an ordinary illegitimate child? She was Gray's younger sister from the same mother, so naturally he couldn't treat her like an ordinary illegitimate child. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought Sarah back to the castle with him. Although the fact that Gray was already a ferocious blood warrior was still a secret, Gray was an upper-level blood warrior. She should at least know about this, right? Knowing that Gray had this kind of potential and knowing how important Gray was to the Fergus family, she actually dared to use such a small trick on Sarah. If this wasn't short-sighted, then what was? Bernal glanced at the jewelry on Caroline's body, then at Sarah, and his brows furrowed imperceptibly. Looks like I have to remind Mother when I have time. His mother didn't know, but he did. The current Gray was a genuine ferocious blood warrior, and his strength wasn't inferior to his father's. Even his father tried his best to use a negotiating tone with him, showing how much his father valued him. It was almost inevitable that he would become the future leader of the Fergus family. Under these circumstances, if his mother became hostile with him, the one who would suffer in the end would be his mother. The 25th item is a 1,000 skills battle axe. The starting price is 10 gold coins. The 37th lot, a high-quality leather armor sewn from the leather of a bull. Starting price 100 gold coins. The 50th lot, and also the finale of this auction, a magic sword refined by Master Roland, with a lightning attribute. Starting price 800 gold coins. The atmosphere in private room number 3, where the Fergus family was slightly heavy, but the auction on the stage continued. Chapter 150. 900 gold coins, 1,000 gold coins. 1,200 gold coins. 3,000 gold coins. 4,100 gold coins. From the beginning of the auction, the price had been rising. The bids came from the private rooms on the second floor. As for the first floor, they didn't have the ability to participate in the auction. 5,000 gold coins. A voice came from a private room on the left side of Gray's private room. 5,200 gold coins. A voice came from a private room on the right side of Gray's private room. 5,400 gold coins. Viscount Fergus said. When the price exceeded 5,000 gold coins, there were 2 other families besides the Fergus family that were still bidding. It has already exceeded 5,000 gold coins, and there are still 2 families bidding. The lightning attribute is indeed more valued than the other attributes. Gray sighed slightly. Gray had participated in similar auctions several times. Ordinary magic weapons were sold for around 5,000 gold coins. Like this magic sword, the price had already exceeded 5,000 gold coins. There were actually two families bidding with the Fergus family. This was very rare. The lightning attribute has a paralyzing effect. It is indeed more popular than the other attributes. Its value is not much different from the special attributes. Bernal said, "Indeed, lightning has both a powerful destructive power and a paralyzing effect. Its value is extremely close to the special attributes." Gray agreed. The special attributes were different from ordinary attributes. These attributes often had characteristics such as being rare, hard to defend against, powerful, and so on. Some of the weapons with special attributes were more powerful than ordinary weapons. Some of the attacks were very strange and difficult to defend against. It was easy to be at a disadvantage if one didn't know. According to Gray's knowledge, among the Viscounts, Viscount Richen's weapon was a magic weapon with special attributes. After this weapon was activated, it could release an invisible sound wave attack. Ordinary defensive methods couldn't defend against it at all. In a battle, one either had to avoid the sound wave attack range or rely on one's strong physique to withstand it. They were already in a disadvantageous position from the beginning. 6,000 gold coins. 7,000 gold coins. 8,000 gold coins. Fergus was a Viscount. 8,200 gold coins. A voice came from the room to the left of the Fergus family room. When the price exceeded 8,000 gold coins, the families on the right side of the Fergus family room had already stopped bidding. The only one who was still bidding was the private room on the left side of the Fergus family room. 8,400 gold coins. Viscount Fergus quoted price. 8,600 gold coins. The private room on the left made a bid, but the voice was slightly hesitant. 8,800 gold coins. Viscount Fergus immediately bid after the other party bid. 9,000 gold coins. The woman in the private room on the left hesitated for quite a while. Only when the black-haired woman asked if anyone else wanted to bid did she make a bid. 9,200 gold coins. Viscount Fergus continued to raise the price. The private room on the left was silent, and no one else bid. Obviously, the price of over 9,000 gold coins had exceeded the expectations of the people in the private room on the left. 9,200 gold coins. Anyone else? The black-haired woman's gaze swept across the private rooms on the second floor. Seeing that no one else was bidding, she opened her mouth and said, "Congratulations to private room number 3 for winning this lightning attribute magic sword." In a private room on the second floor, the Rock family was sitting. The Fergus family is really rich. Maury Locke's voice was filled with jealousy. The Rock family had also bid for this magic sword, but after the price rose to 5,000 gold coins, they had already given up. As a Viscount family, the Rock family's annual tax income could reach tens of thousands, but with a lot of income came a lot of expenses. Even the Rock family didn't dare to be too extravagant when it came to the expenditure of training resources and maintaining a superior aristocratic lifestyle. But compared to them, the Fergus family didn't even blink. During the entire bidding process, they didn't hesitate at all to bid, showing their powerful financial resources. This made him extremely jealous. It seems that the Fergus family got a lot of benefits from the Sidney family last time when they besieged the Oliver family. Aylford Locke's tone was filled with envy. The Sidney family is too biased. They actually gave this kind of mission to the Fergus family. Maury Locke said with dissatisfaction, "In terms of geographical location, our Rock family is also bordered by the Oliver family. Why not give a mission of exterminating the Oliver family to the Rock family? The Sidney family is indeed too biased towards the Fergus family." Aylford Locke was also slightly dissatisfied. Not to mention giving the mission of exterminating the Oliver family to our Rock family. Even if the Rock family and the Fergus family participate together, it would be good. This matter isn't that simple. Viscount Locke held his chin with one hand and thought for a while before saying, "Father, what do you mean?" Aylford Locke looked at Viscount Locke in confusion. "Haven't you thought about how the news of the Oliver family colluding with the Shadow Serpent was leaked?" Viscount Locke asked back, "Didn't the Sidney family say that it was discovered by the Sidney family spies?" Aylford Locke asked curiously, That's true. But is there a possibility that the Sydney family is deliberately protecting the family, that informant? Speaking of this, Viscount Locke's mouth revealed a cold smile. When the Fergus family left the Ford auction house and returned to Fergus Castle, it was already evening. The next day, Gray, who had finished his morning training, held a magic sword with the leather of some kind of blood beast as a scabbard and went to the place where he tested his strength when he reached the ferocious blood warrior level. He slowly pulled out the magic sword from the leather scabbard, and a beautiful blue and white blade slowly appeared before his eyes. It was a long sword that was about 4 meters long. The hilt of the sword was like the sharp claws of a blood beast. The entire blade was the same color as lightning. In the middle of both sides of the sword, there was a slightly concave blood groove. While beautiful, it also showed its side as a weapon. Asterisk crackle. Asterisk the blood force was injected into the blade, and a change suddenly occurred. Blue and white lightning suddenly appeared, like a thunder snake, coiling around the blade and covering the entire blade, wantonly twisting, emitting a dangerous aura. Whoosh! Arriving in front of a tree, Gray swung the sword down. Asterisk chi. Asterisk sharp, extremely sharp. Gray did not feel the slightest bit of resistance and had already passed through the tree. Not only that, just as the tree was chopped down, the lightning spread from the sword to the tree. The originally green leaves and yellowish-brown tree trunk suddenly turned pitch black in an instant, and the texture was completely carbonized. Not only that, there are also flames burning. With this kind of power, blood beasts with weaker defenses would definitely be injured. Even blood beasts with stronger defenses would probably be paralyzed. Seeing this destructive power, Gray nodded in satisfaction. If he had not used the 1,000-skill sword, but this magic sword with a lightning attribute, when facing the iron-armed ape, he would have been able to kill it without using the icy wind blade. The paralysis effect will be enough to slow down the iron-armed ape's movements, allowing Gray to attack the vital parts of the ape that were heavily protected. The destructive power of the lightning, in addition to the special characteristics of Hanhu that Gray possessed, was enough to inflict serious damage to the iron-armed ape when attacking its vital parts. Now that I have a suitable weapon, it's time to explore the ruins on the map. Gray thought to himself as he sheathed the weapon. At most, he would be able to reach the level of a blood berserker in a year. This period of time was not short, but it was not long either. The cultivation of blood techniques after becoming a blood berserker was a problem that had to be solved. If he could not solve it quickly, it would definitely affect the speed of his growth when he reached the level of a blood berserker in a year. Chapter 151. A caravan set off from Fergus City. This was the Fergus family's caravan that was transporting medicinal ingredients to the Sydney family. According to last year's agreement between the Fergus family and the Sydney family, the Fergus family would provide the Sydney family with medicinal ingredients in the long term, while the Sydney family would provide pharmacists to refine these medicinal ingredients into finished products for export, allowing both parties to earn profits. This cooperation could bring the Fergus family tens of thousands of gold every year. It was even higher than the tax income of the Fergus family every year. In this caravan, there was obviously a carriage that was more luxurious than the others. Gray was sitting in the carriage. Viscount Fergus didn't agree to Gray's suggestion of traveling at first, but Gray convinced him in the end. Although he was a little young, he had the strength of a ferocious warrior, so there wasn't much of an issue in terms of safety. Traveling for a bit wasn't a bad experience, so Viscount Fergus agreed in the end. Right now, he was riding the carriage of the Fergus clan, heading towards Sydney City. Afterwards, he would take a caravan from Sydney City to Marquis Oka's territory. Marquis Oka's territory was where the map was located. Sydney City was the largest and most prosperous city in Marquis Oka's territory. Caravans from other marquises would often come here, so it was a huge transit point. This was the most suitable place to board a caravan heading to another Marquis territory. The next morning, the caravan was already far away from Fergus territory. Roar! Suddenly, a series of hurried neighs sounded. Gray felt the carriage he was in suddenly jerk, then quickly turn a corner and finally stop in a hurry. Outside the carriage, there was a lot of noise. Gray raised his eyebrows and jumped down from the carriage. In an instant, all the carriages were herded together, forming a circle. Outside the carriage, dozens of Fergus family guards drew their weapons and guarded the carriage. In the distance, dozens of people surrounded the caravan with murderous intent. These people were dressed differently, and their weapons were also different. The only thing they had in common was that they were all filled with killing intent, and their eyes were as fierce as wolves as they stared at the caravan. Without a doubt, this was a robbery. "Young Master Gray, it's too dangerous here. Please get into the carriage." Seeing Gray coming down from the carriage, a middle-aged man ran over and said anxiously. The middle-aged man had dark skin and a skinny build. His attire was much better than that of a commoner, but it was much worse than that of a noble. This was the steward of the Fergus family in charge of this caravan. He thought that Gray was worried about the robbers, so he quickly comforted him. "Young Master Gray, don't worry. With Lord Corgi here, these bandits will soon be defeated. Lord Corgi, one of the 8 lords of the Fergus family now. He was one of the few high-ranking blood warriors in the Fergus family's territory. As a partnership that could bring the Fergus family tens of thousands of dollars in profit every year, the Fergus family naturally valued it greatly. Therefore, they sent Lord Corgi to escort them." Gray waved his hand and interrupted the other party's words, asking, "Have you encountered any robbers in the previous deliveries?" "No, not even once." Although he didn't understand what Gray meant, the middle-aged manager hurriedly replied, "Not even once." Gray's eyebrows furrowed slightly. Is it just a coincidence, or are they targeting me? This was the first time he had left the Fergus family's territory without the company of Fergus. Knowing this situation, it wasn't impossible that some of the Viscount families felt that this was an opportunity to assassinate him. "Young Master Gray, why you're saying that these people might be targeting you?" Hearing Gray's words, the middle-aged manager was shocked and didn't dare to speak with confidence. "Young Master Gray, could you be mistaken?" As the manager of a caravan in the Fergus family, he knew that this young master of his had been assassinated many times. He didn't think that he would encounter them while traveling with him. "Whether or not I'm mistaken, we'll know soon enough." Gray watched the bandits who were quickly surrounding them and said coldly, "With Lord Corgi's strength as a high-ranking blood warrior, he could easily deal with normal bandits. If this was really the case, then it was naturally just a coincidence. However, if there was someone among them who could contend against Lord Corgi, and there was more than one of them, then it was worth thinking about." Looking at the approaching bandits, Lord Corgi coldly reprimanded, "This is the Fergus family's caravan. Leave immediately." However, hearing his reprimand, this group of people didn't retreat because of it. They continued to quickly surround the caravan. "Kill." Lord Corgi's expression was cold. As he ordered the guards of the caravan, he lightly tapped the ground and rushed out. He came to the front of a man who was holding an axe and slashed with his sword. Pooh! The man didn't even have time to react. He didn't even have time to raise his weapon before he was slashed by Lord Corgi. In addition, he didn't even have any leather armor on him. He didn't even have time to groan before he was cut in half. Bright red blood spurted out like a small fountain and sprayed onto the ground. Pung! Then, Lord Corgi took a step to the right and arrived in front of another bandit. He also slashed with his sword. Pooh! This bandit was slightly better than the previous one. He reacted and subconsciously raised his weapon. However, before he could raise his weapon, his head was already chopped off by Lord Corgi's sword. Whoosh! Suddenly, Lord Corgi felt a strong wind coming at him from the side. His expression changed, and he blocked with his sword. Clang! An ear-piercing collision sounded. Lord Corgi retreated, and his expression changed slightly. High-level blood warrior. At this moment, another strong wind came from the other side. He reflexively dodged to the side, but he didn't manage to dodge in time. Slash! A shallow wound appeared on his armor at the side of his waist. Faint traces of blood immediately seeped out. If it wasn't for the armor's protection, it wouldn't be as simple as a shallow wound. Two high-level blood warriors. Lord Corgi's expression turned completely serious. He looked at the man holding an axe and the man holding a sword who attacked him with caution. Who are you people? It wasn't impossible for two high-level blood warriors to appear in a group of bandits, but it was extremely unlikely. The two men didn't answer. One of them pounced on Lord Corgi, while the other pounced on the caravan. Two high-level blood warriors are you really here for young Master Gray? The middle-aged manager suddenly felt his hands and feet turn cold. No matter how strong Lord Corgi was, he was only an upper-level blood warrior. Facing two people of the same level, it was extremely difficult for him to win. Quick, quick, young Master Gray, run. That person is coming for you. He shouted in shock, but realized that there was no response. He turned his head and realized that Gray was long gone. Humph! Holding an axe that was made of metal, the man's gaze was cold as he charged towards the caravan. He had a large physique and held an axe that was as big as a human head. As he ran, his footsteps made heavy sounds on the ground. The three Fergus family guards in front of him couldn't help but change their expressions. However, they still gritted their teeth and charged towards the man. Clank! Facing the weapons of two of the guards, he only swung the huge axe in his hand. The huge axe smashed onto the two men's weapons like a heavy hammer. The two men's weapons were reversed and smashed onto their bodies. The two men flew backwards and spat out mouthfuls of blood after landing on the ground. Although they weren't dead, they were obviously heavily injured. Then his huge axe suddenly chopped downwards. It was obvious that he wanted to split the third Fergus family guard in half from head to toe. The huge difference in strength made it impossible for the Fergus family guard to withdraw his weapon in time to block. He could only watch as the huge axe that was bigger than his head chopped down on him. Whoosh! At this moment, a bluish-white sword appeared and blocked the axe. Clank! Chapter 152. Who are you? With his arm slightly numb, the burly man looked at the person holding the blue and white sword seriously. To be able to force him back, the other party's strength was at least an upper-level blood warrior. Gray Fergus. Gray stared coldly at the burly man. What, you are Gray Fergus? The burly man looked at Gray in shock. He knew that the target this time was the son of the Fergus family, Gray Fergus, but he didn't know what he looked like. He didn't need to know either. He only needed to destroy this caravan, and Gray Fergus would naturally die. However, at this time, the person who called himself Gray Fergus in front of him was indeed about the same age as described. He was a teenager, but in terms of strength, it didn't match at all. How could such strength be a middle-level blood warrior? Which family sent you? Gray asked coldly. The burly man didn't answer, but he answered with his actions. He stomped on the ground, and his body burst out. Whoosh! The battle axe that was bigger than a human head chopped towards Gray with a terrifying sound effect. Before the battle axe arrived, the strong wind had already rushed over like a sandstorm, slapping his face painfully. Gray's expression was cold. Crackle! Blue and white lightning suddenly wrapped around the sword, and then went to meet the battle axe. Ding! The battle axe was easily blocked. Then, the blue and white lightning suddenly traveled along the battle axe and passed to the burly man's body. Crackle! The burly man was wrapped in the blue and white lightning visible to the naked eye. His body couldn't help but tremble, and his whole body became charred in the blink of an eye. Clatter! The huge battle axe fell, and the burly man fell down like a piece of coal. There wasn't a spot on his body that was intact. Dead? But it doesn't matter. There's still one more. Gray passed by the burly man's body and rushed towards the man who was fighting with Lord Corgi. Originally, he planned to capture the burly man alive and interrogate him about the mastermind behind the scenes. However, he suddenly had an idea and wanted to test the power of this newly acquired magic sword, lightning. However, he did not expect the power of the lightning to be so strong. A high-ranking blood warrior was killed with just one strike. In fact, the reason why it was so powerful was because of his current strength. In addition to the grade of the weapon, the strength of a magical weapon was also related to the strength of the wielder. To a certain extent, the stronger the wielder, the stronger the power of the weapon. He was now a ferocious blood warrior, and the power he could unleash was at the level of a ferocious blood warrior. Naturally, it was not something the burly man could withstand. Dead. Young Master Gray, killed, an upper-level blood warrior? The middle-aged manager was stunned and couldn't help but rub his eyes. When he found Gray again, he found that Gray was already fighting with a robber with the strength of an upper-level blood warrior. He was extremely worried and prepared to call the guards to protect him. After all, if something happened to Gray, none of them would have an easy time. However, in the next moment, he saw that the sword in Gray's hand suddenly emitted lightning. Then, it collided with the battle axe of the upper-level blood warrior robber, which was larger than his head. Following that, the upper-level blood warrior robber seemed to have been carbonized. His entire body was pitch black as he fell stiffly to the ground. One of the upper-level blood warriors was killed by young Master Gray. The second in command of the upper-level blood warrior is dead. It wasn't just him. Whether it was the guards of the Fergus family or the robbers, they were all shocked. A young man had easily killed an upper-level blood warrior. This feeling was like a child who had problems walking had killed an adult. It was hard for them to believe. How can this be? The sword-wielding robber who was fighting with Lord Corgi was equally shocked. His comrade, who had the strength of an upper-level blood warrior, had been defeated just like that. Although the opponent had a magical weapon in his hand, wasn't this power too strong? Retreat. His expression became gloomy. With a loud shout, he quickly retreated. That young man was too strange. His comrade had already been killed by him within a few moves. If that young man joined forces with this upper-level blood warrior, the robbers fled in all directions, but the one who ran the fastest was him. After all, he was an upper-level blood warrior. Poof! At this moment, he suddenly felt a ray of blue light flash in his direction. He instinctively dodged to the side, but before he could dodge, he felt a sudden pain in his left leg. He lowered his head to look at his left leg and was instantly horrified. His left leg had been severed from a thigh. Bright red blood spurted out like a fountain, completely dyeing the ground around him red. Thud! His body lost balance, and he fell directly onto the ground that was covered in his own blood. His body was instantly covered in blood. Ow, how could it be so fast? He used his hands to support his body, his face full of shock. He raised his head with difficulty and saw that the young man from before had appeared in front of him at some point. The bluish-white sword was stained with blood. It seemed that the one who had severed his left leg was this young man in front of him. "Which family sent you to assassinate me?" Gray asked coldly as he stared at the horrified man in front of him. You are Gray Fergus?" Cold sweat broke out on the man's forehead. He did not know whether it was from fear or pain. "Yes, I'm the Gray Fergus that you want to kill. Who sent you to kill me?" Gray looked at the man with a cold expression. I don't know." Being stared by Gray, the man felt as if he was being stared at by a blood fiend. He subconsciously looked away. "Young Master Gray." Lord Corgi hurried over and greeted Gray. Gray's strength made him slightly fearful. An upper-level blood warrior had almost no ability to resist in front of him. Although he had a magic weapon, he was still too strong. Was young Master Gray really just an upper-level blood warrior? "Uncle Corgi, can I trouble you to get someone to interrogate him and see who or what family wants to kill me?" Gray raised his eyebrows slightly and said. To be honest, he was also a little surprised that there would be another assassination attempt after the destruction of the Oliver family. It seemed that the Oliver family was not the only family that had their eyes on him. He just did not know which Viscount family it was this time. Was it the Rock family that had fallen out with the Fergus family because of the Hanhu cub? Or was it the Richens family that was defeated by the Fergus family at the Marquis birthday banquet and lost face? Or was it the Bessemer family that seemed to be maintaining peace with the Fergus family on the surface? Lord Corgi glanced at the man with a sinister smile on his face and said, "Don't worry, young Master Gray. I will get someone to treat him well. I guarantee that he will confess everything." In the afternoon, the caravan arrived at Sydney City and transported the herbs to a shop opened by the Sydney family in Sydney City. They then checked into a nearby hotel. In one of the hotel rooms, Gray and Lord Corgi were sitting in one of them. "Young Master Gray, the interrogation has been completed," Lord Corgi said. "Which family is it?" Gray hurriedly asked. "They don't know. They were originally wanted criminals and have been operating in the Marquis territory as robbers. Someone found them yesterday and told them to kill you." Because the reward was too high and they were paid half of the reward in advance, they took the risk. Speaking until here, Lord Corgi poured a large pile of magic coins on the tea table. Looking at the number, there were about 100 magic coins. This is the half of the reward. After I got the information from this person, I killed him. Although I know where they met, the news is already spread. The person who bribed them should not appear again. 10,000 gold coins and only half. Gray squinted his eyes. The forces that wanted to kill him were really willing to pay a heavy price. 20,000 gold coins. This was equivalent to 2 years of tax for a Viscount family. It could be seen that the family that wanted to kill him was very determined. Young Master Gray, now that something like this has happened, why don't you postpone your travels? Lord Corgi suggested. He also knew that Gray was going to travel. No need. Gray shook his head, then divided the magic coins on the table into 2 piles and said, Uncle Corgi, these 2 people were killed by us together. We'll split the money. No need, young Master Gray. These 2 people were killed and captured by you. The money naturally belongs to you. Lord Corgi quickly shook his head. Uncle Corgi, there's really no need, young Master Gray. Lord Corgi waved his hand and firmly refused. Although the money was indeed tempting, he didn't contribute much this time, so he was really embarrassed to ask for it. Seeing the other party's firm refusal, Gray thought for a moment and said, Uncle Corgi, since the 2 robbers are wanted criminals, they should be able to get a reward. You can go and get them. This, okay? Thank you, young Master Gray. Chapter 153. Lord Corgi bade farewell and left. The caravan was attacked, and soldiers were killed. There were many things that he needed to deal with. Knock, knock, knock. But not long after, Gray's door was knocked again. Young Master Gray, come in. Gray called out. The middle-aged manager pushed the door open and walked in. After entering, he respectfully bowed to Gray and stood there cautiously. Sit. Gray gestured for him to sit down and talk. Thank you, young Master Gray. The middle-aged manager was flattered and sat down. Half of his but was on the chair while the other half was in the air. In this world, there was a natural gap between the nobles and the commoners. The nobles had the power to kill the commoners. This caused the commoners to be very careful when facing the nobles. They were afraid that they would offend the nobles and bring about a fatal disaster. How is it? Have you found the caravan heading to Marquis Oka's territory? Gray asked faintly. He was already used to the middle-aged manager's cautious attitude. The concept of nobles being noble and commoners being lowly was deeply ingrained in the bones of the people in this world. He had no intention of correcting it, because it was not something he could correct. Of course, the main reason was that he liked this kind of small privilege. Found it, but it was a little rushed. The middle-aged manager said. A little rushed? When did this caravan depart? Gray turned his head and looked at the middle-aged manager. They will depart early tomorrow morning. Early tomorrow morning? Gray raised his eyebrows slightly. He originally planned to visit the Sydney family and stay with the Sydney family for a few days to borrow some books. He did not expect the time to be so rushed. Visiting the Sydney family and borrowing books from the Sydney family was naturally impossible. Afraid that Gray would be dissatisfied with the way he handled things, the middle-aged manager hurriedly added, Young Master Gray, this is the only caravan heading to Marquis Oka's territory recently. All right, I got it. Come over tomorrow morning and show me the way. Gray waved his hand. Since time was so tight, there was no other way. As for visiting the Sydney family and borrowing books, there would be plenty of time in the future. Yes, young Master Gray. The middle-aged manager stood up and bowed to Gray again before leaving respectfully. The next day, Gray woke up earlier than usual. It took him more than an hour to finish his morning training, wash up, and have breakfast. Even if he was traveling, he didn't plan to stop cultivating. As for being seen or disturbed by others while cultivating, it wasn't to the extent of that. As one of the best rooms in the inn, Gray's room was a suite. Not only did it have a living room, a bedroom, and a bathroom, it also had a cultivation room that wasn't too big. It could guarantee that no one would see or disturb him while he was cultivating. Not long after, the middle-aged manager arrived and led Gray to the city gate. Near the city gate, several caravans stopped on both sides of the road, preparing to set off. They came to one of the caravans. "Young Master Gray, we're here." Gray walked down from the carriage and looked at the caravan that he was about to board. This was a caravan made up of about a dozen carriages and about 100 people. After stating his purpose and paying the expensive carriage fee of 1 gold coin, an old man who seemed to be the manager of the caravan was immediately full of smiles. They had only earned about 10 gold coins on this trip, but by bringing along a noble young master, they had earned 1 gold coin. In comparison, transporting goods wasn't as profitable as transporting people. Of course, such a good deal wasn't common, but their luck was good this time. Other than this noble young master, there were 4 other people. Just by transporting people, they had earned 5 gold coins. "Young master, do you have any requirements for the carriage?" the old man carefully asked as he led the way for Gray. Since they had already paid the carriage fee and the person riding was obviously a noble young master, they naturally couldn't be negligent. Otherwise, if they caused the other party's dissatisfaction, they would be in trouble. He had heard that a caravan had been detained by a noble because of this reason, and in the end, they had lost everything. "It's fine as long as it's clean. If possible, it would be best if there were fewer people." Gray thought for a while and said. Because of the experience of cramped trains in his previous life, Gray proposed a fewer people request. After all, if there were too many people squeezing into a carriage, it would be very uncomfortable. Fewer people? Hearing Gray's request, the old man looked a little troubled. Although the caravan had more than 10 carriages, there were still many people. Moreover, they had to transport goods. It wasn't impossible to leave 1 carriage, but the other carriages would be very crowded. But after all, this was a big customer and a noble young master. If other people were to sit in the same carriage with this noble young master, it would be disastrous if there was a conflict. He thought for a while and decided to leave 1 carriage alone. But at this time, he suddenly remembered that the 4 people riding on their caravan had brought their own carriages. Including the coachman, there were only 4 people in total, which completely met the requirements of this young master. Thinking of this, he opened his mouth and said, "Young master, please follow me." Leading Gray, the old man came in front of a large carriage. The carriage did not have a family emblem, but the decorations were very luxurious. The body of the carriage was decorated with high-quality silk, and there were 2 rune lights inlaid with gems at the front of the carriage. The horses that pulled the carriage were tall and strong. It was impossible to tell what breed they were, but they were definitely of high quality. The carriage in front of him was not inferior to the 2-horse carriage that the Fergus family used as a front. The most special thing was that the coachman was actually a strong man wearing black battle armor. A blood warrior, his strength is probably not weak. Gray secretly guessed. Battle armor, even the cheapest battle armor, would cost at least a few dozen gold coins. Even the rich Sydney family would not use battle armor as standard equipment for their soldiers. Moreover, the battle armor on this person was obviously not the standard battle armor that was only worth a few dozen gold coins. Therefore, this person was undoubtedly a blood warrior, and his strength should not be too weak. Otherwise, it would not be worthy of the battle armor on him. What made him even more curious was the identity of the person in the carriage. Not only did he have such a luxurious carriage, but he also had a blood warrior who was obviously not weak, as the coachman. "What is it?" Noticing Gray and the old man walking over, the strong man wearing black battle armor turned his head and looked over. This was a man with a thick beard. His brown beard completely covered his chin and both sides of his face. "Sir," the old man hurriedly said, "this noble young master also wants to ride on our caravan, but our carriages are a little crowded. I wonder if this noble young master can ride on your carriage?" Hearing the old man's words, the brown bearded man frowned and turned his head to the inside of the carriage. "Miss, there's a noble young master who wants to ride on our carriage." "Sure." In the carriage, a young girl's cold voice sounded. "Come on in." The brown bearded man gave way enough space to enter the carriage and said to Gray. Gray nodded to the brown bearded man, opened the curtains, and walked into the carriage. In the carriage, there were 3 beautiful women, 2 young women, and a young girl. The 2 young women were in their early 20s. They were not wearing noble attire, but exquisite female battle armor. One of them was orange and the other was red. The young girl was wearing a blue noble dress and had bright purple hair that reached her waist. Her skin was white, and her face was delicate. Her eyes were clear, and there was a hint of intelligence in them. She was an extremely beautiful young girl. Chapter 154. Hello. Thank you for allowing me to ride in your carriage. Gray gave the purple-haired girl a noble's bow to express his gratitude and introduced himself. Gray Fergus. The voice that came from the carriage just now was obviously the voice of a young girl. Among the three of them, only the purple-haired girl in front of him matched her identity. No need, please sit. While Gray was sizing up the three of them were sizing up Gray as well. Hearing Gray's thanks, the purple-haired girl smiled at Gray. I'm Sophia Pendella. Nodding to the other party, Gray sat down on the soft fur-covered bench. The interior of the carriage was as exquisite as the exterior. On the roof of the carriage, there was a small rune lamp that was emitting a gentle light. Gray was even more curious about the girl's identity. A powerful blood warrior as the coachman, an exquisitely decorated carriage accompanied by two women who looked like maids but were dressed in female night attire. All these signs indicated that the girl's identity was not simple. However, he had never heard of the surname Pendella before. She was probably not a noble from the Sydney Marquisate. Not long after, the caravan set off and drove out of the city of Sydney, heading towards their destination. Although Gray was an outsider in the carriage, the three of them did not appear to be reserved. After the carriage set off, they started chatting. The content of their chat was very varied. Sometimes it was about clothes, sometimes it was about jewelry, and sometimes it was about love stories and novels. Gray sat in the carriage and looked at the scenery outside through the window. The shrubs and grass by the roadside, the fields full of crops, the woodlands that they occasionally passed by. It had been more than a year since Gray came to this world, but the places that he had been to were extremely limited. This time, he wanted to take a good look at the scenery along the way. At noon, the caravan stopped for a short rest and continued their journey after lunch. During the journey, Gray's appetite naturally shocked the caravan and the four people in the carriage. Although they had heard of some people with amazing appetites, they had never heard of someone like Gray who could eat 3 or 4 meals in one meal. Crack! In the afternoon, the originally clear sky was suddenly covered with dark clouds, and in an instant, it began to rain heavily. The rain was so dense that it seemed as if it was sprinkling down from a sprinkler. When it hit the carriage, it sounded like rocks were falling down one after another. In the blink of an eye, the surrounding ground became wet. Many places formed obvious water currents that flowed towards the low-lying areas. What a heavy rain! Gray said in surprise as he closed the window of the carriage. Yes, and it's too sudden. It suddenly came down. The purple-haired girl Sophia was also slightly surprised. I don't know how long this rain will last. If it keeps raining, it will be very troublesome to set up the tent later. The woman in orange said. From the looks of it, it won't stop anytime soon. The woman in the red battle suit answered. Then I'll have to trouble you. The woman in orange raised her eyebrows slightly. At this moment, the brown bearded man's voice came from outside the carriage. Miss, the caravan said that they've discovered a village ahead and are planning to stay there tonight. There's a village? That's great. Before the purple-haired girl, Sophia, could say anything, the woman in orange and the woman in red couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. This weather was not suitable for setting up a tent at all. Even if they set up a tent, it would still be wet and not suitable for sleeping. They originally thought that they would have to spend the night in the carriage. They did not expect that there would be a village ahead and they could stay in the village. A village? Gray could not help but be delighted. Although the conditions in the village would not be very good, it would definitely be much better than sleeping in a wet tent. After the carriage traveled a few hundred meters, it turned into a fork in the road and finally stopped. Gray opened the window of the carriage slightly and looked outside. A low house appeared in front of him. It was rather old, and there was moss growing around the house. One could not help but worry that the house would suddenly collapse in such a heavy rain. And he also noticed that there were many spider webs near the house, even on the door. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. He opened the window a little more and looked at the other houses. He saw that these houses were exactly the same as the previous one. They were equally old and covered in moss and spider webs. This village might be an uninhabited village. He voiced out his conjecture. An uninhabited village? The woman in red was surprised. She came to another window and opened it slightly to look outside. A moment later, she closed the window and said to the purple-haired girl Sophia, "Miss, this village really seems to be uninhabited." The purple-haired girl Sophia nodded and said, "Let's find a place to set up a tent. If we can't find a place to set up a tent, we'll rest in the carriage for the time being." The situation that they were most worried about did not happen. After more than an hour, someone from the caravan came to inform them that the tents had been set up for them. The tents were set up in the houses that did not leak rain. Gray and the brown-bearded man were given one tent, while the purple-haired girl Sophia and the other two women were given another tent. The two tents were next to each other. The heavy rain was still falling. In such weather, the afternoon training was certainly impossible. After dinner, Gray returned to the house where the tents were. The brown-bearded man had returned before him. He was holding an iron pot and sipping from it. The smell of alcohol drifted over from afar. Seeing Gray coming, he grinned at Gray, waved the iron pot in his hand, and asked, "Young master, would you like some?" "Thank you, but no thanks. I'm not at the age of drinking yet." Gray politely refused. He did not insist on drinking after his coming-of-age ceremony at the age of 18, but the man only had one pot in his hand. He really did not have the habit of drinking other people's saliva. On the other side, the purple-haired girl Sophia and the woman in red combat attire were sitting around a foldable wooden table. They were drinking milk tea while looking at the pouring rain outside. As for the other woman, she was dressed in an orange battle suit. No one knew where she went, so they didn't see her. Seeing Gray return, the purple-haired girl Sophia nodded at Gray and asked, "Would you like a cup of milk tea?" "Thank you." Gray did not refuse this time. He walked over and sat on the side of the foldable table under the other party signal. The purple-haired girl Sophia took out a clean white teacup, poured a cup, and handed it to Gray. The milk tea was slightly steaming, and the rich aroma hit him in the face. Gray reached out and took a sip. "It's delicious." Gray's eyes lit up as he praised. The taste was slightly different from the milk tea he usually drank, but it was more mellow and delicious. "It's good that you like it." The purple-haired girl, Sophia, smiled and asked, "It's rare to see someone like you traveling alone. Isn't your family worried?" "It's all right. Although I was stopped when I suggested it, I still managed to convince them in the end." Gray shrugged and said. The sound of footsteps approached from behind. Gray looked back and saw the woman in orange combat attire, holding an umbrella, walking over. She sat on the other side of the wooden table and said, "Miss, as you expected, this village is indeed strange." The woman in orange combat attire said, "Strange." Gray looked at the woman in orange combat attire in confusion. He was wondering where she went, but he did not expect her to be investigating this village. From the way she spoke, it sounded like she was following the purple-haired girl Sophia's orders. Did she discover something? "What's strange?" the purple-haired girl Sophia asked. "There are many daily necessities in all the houses. It's as if all the villagers suddenly evacuated and did not take anything away." Chapter 155. Suddenly retreated? Gray could not help but frown when he heard the woman's deduction. If the civilians of this world wanted to move, they would definitely not let go of anything. After all, in this world with backward productivity, it would cost a lot of money to buy these things. However, no one in this village took their daily necessities with them. This was definitely abnormal. The purple-haired girl, Sophia, also frowned slightly. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. She looked at the brown-bearded man who was also looking in this direction and said, "Uncle Teresa, go check the surroundings of the village. Pay attention to whether there are neatly arranged tombs around the village." "Yes." Mississippi, the brown-bearded man, Teresa, took the umbrella from the woman in the orange battle uniform and left. Miss Sophia thinks that these villagers are all dead and that they were killed at almost the same time. Gray looked at the purple-haired girl, Sophia, and asked, Under normal circumstances, if someone died in a village in this world, they would be buried in different places outside the village, because the time of death was not the same. Under normal circumstances, these tombs would be sparse and without any pattern. However, there was one exception, and that was if a large number of people died at the same time. Because they were buried at the same time, the tombs would be neatly arranged. Sophia said to pay attention to the neatly arranged tombs. Obviously, she was trying to determine if a large number of villagers died at the same time. I have this suspicion. The purple-haired girl, Sophia, nodded and said, "Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that they encountered some emergency and did not have time to take their daily necessities, so they suddenly retreated." Clap, clap, clap. They did not have to wait for long. After a while, the brown-bearded man, Teresa, appeared with the sound of footsteps. Everyone could not help but look at him. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he did not hesitate and said, "There is indeed a large area of neatly arranged tombs. Looking at the number, I'm afraid there are 100 or 200. Hearing the brown-bearded man's words, the woman in the red battle uniform was slightly surprised. In other words, the people in this village are basically dead, and at almost the same time. Could it be that they encounter bandits? It is very possible, but we can't rule out other possibilities." Sophia frowned. Everyone was silent as they tried to guess what had happened to the people in this village. At the same time, they sympathized with these people as they actually encountered such misfortune. In the middle of the night, the pouring rain had stopped, but the sky was still gloomy. There was no moonlight, and the world was plunged into darkness. And it was in this darkness that blurry figures with white light suddenly appeared one after another. They were like cats that had smelled blood. They came to the houses where there were people easily passing through the doors and walls. In a large tent, 7 men slept side by side on the ground, covered with only a layer of straw mats. The weather had just rained and was slightly cold, so they couldn't help but tightly wrap themselves in thin blankets. At this moment, a hazy figure shrouded in white light easily passed through the leather tent and entered the tent. As the hazy figure shrouded in white light entered, the temperature in the tent suddenly dropped. The 7 of them subconsciously pulled the blankets on their bodies and curled up even more. The hazy figure shrouded in white light slowly approached. Finally, he came close to one of the 7 men and stuck his entire body onto him. The hazy figure shrouded in white light passed through the quilt and attached to the man's body. The two merged into one and couldn't be distinguished from each other. But at this time, the man's body also began to emit a hazy white light. At this moment, the man's mouth let out an unconscious scream. His body couldn't help but twist. His hands clutched at his neck, and long saliva flowed out of his mouth like a child. "Pat, what's wrong with you?" The man's strange behavior awakened the other 6 people. They all looked at the man who was emitting white light in surprise. They reached out to shake the man, but they couldn't help but retract their hands. The man's body was cold, like a block of ice. The man's scream didn't last long and stopped. The man's eyes were rolled outwards, his mouth was wide open, and his body was spasming. He didn't move anymore. Then, the hazy white figure gradually floated up from his body. It turned around and pounced on another man. Screams and screams of horror connected together. Gray was sleeping in the tent. Because it was the first time he enjoyed such treatment in a tent, Gray slept very lightly. Suddenly, he felt the temperature in the tent drop by a lot. He opened his eyes in confusion. His eyes were hazy, and everything was a blur in his eyes. But in the next moment, his face became horrified. Originally, there was only him and the brown, bearded man, Teresa, in the tent. Suddenly, there was a third person in the tent. This person's body was emitting white light. The night was pitch black, but he saw this person. It wasn't through infrared perception, but through the naked eye. What made him even more horrified was that the person in front of him was not standing on the ground. Instead, he was suspended in the air about 20 centimeters above the ground. This person was actually standing in the air. Ghost! This phrase had appeared in some of the books in the castle's library that were similar to hunting mysteries, and it suddenly appeared in his mind. At that time, he just laughed when he read these books. In his heart, he had already determined that they were fiction. After all, he was a person who received a materialistic education in his previous life. Even if he had experienced such an incredible thing as time travel, it still did not change him at all. But now he believed it, because the facts were right in front of him. The appearance of floating in the air, the body emitting white light. The face could not be seen clearly. How similar was it to the ghost described in the castle's books? The ghost was approaching, and Gray felt the temperature around him getting lower and lower. Crack! Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He grabbed the magic sword beside the pillow, suddenly jumped up, and then quickly slashed with the sword. Whoosh! Under the light emitted by the ghost, the blue and white sword suddenly slashed the ghost's body. But in the next moment, a scene that made Gray even more horrified appeared. The ghost that had been slashed by the long sword was like the surface of a lake that had been slashed. A slight ripple appeared on it, and then it completely returned to normal. His attack did not work on the ghost. The body emitted light. The attack was ineffective. I didn't expect there to be such a thing as a ghost. At this moment, a voice sounded. He turned his head slightly and saw that at some point, the bearded man had also stood up and was looking at the ghost warily. Woo! And the ghost seemed to be alarmed by Gray's action. It stretched out its hands and pounced on the two of them, its mouth emitting a horrifying sharp whine. Slash! The sword split the tent open, and Gray did not hesitate to retreat quickly. According to the books, anyone who was touched by the ghost would immediately feel cold and lose control of their body, and finally die. He must not let such a thing touch him. Just like him, the brown-bearded man also retreated quickly. Chapter 156. Woo! The five of them subconsciously gathered together, and the two specters also gathered together. They let out sharp screeches and pounced on the five of them. Its entire body gave off a hazy white light, and it gave off waves of cold chi. Its face was blurry, and it looked like a human, but also like a wild beast. The five of them gripped their weapons tightly. Although they already knew that their weapons were ineffective against the spirits, this was the only thing they could do. This could be a specter. The woman in the red battle suit was slightly pale. It must be. Look at its feet. It's not standing on the ground at all. It's completely floating in the air. That's what the books say about ghosts. The woman in the orange battle suit was also slightly pale, and the hand holding her weapon was trembling slightly. It's coming. Dodge! The brown-bearded man warned loudly. Whoosh! The five of them, including Gray, quickly dodged to the side, avoiding the attack of the two ghosts. Woo! The two ghosts that missed their target let out a blood-curdling screech in anger and turned around to pounce at the five people again. Whoosh! 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 The five of them were quite strong. They moved quickly in the room and dodged two attacks from the spirits. This can't go on, Gray said with a solemn expression. There's nothing we can do. Our attacks are completely ineffective against them. The brown-bearded man frowned. Everyone felt a wave of helplessness. None of them were weak, but the ghost in front of them was clearly not someone who could be hurt by ordinary attacks. At this moment, the purple-haired Sophia suddenly spoke. I read in a book that spirits are afraid of fire and lightning. Whose weapon is fire or lightning? Crackle. Hearing this, Gray immediately poured the power of the sword blood into the magic sword. His magic sword happened to be of the lightning attribute. The surface of the magic sword was suddenly wrapped in blue-white lightning, emitting a dazzling light. It was as if countless lightning snakes were jumping and twisting. At this moment, the two spirits approached again. Whoosh! Gritting his teeth, he swung his sword, which was wrapped in lightning, at the two spirits. He didn't know if the purple-haired girl Sophia was telling the truth, but he could only give it a try. Two sharp screams suddenly rang out. The two ghosts that were slashed by Gray's sword were not intact like before. Instead, they were torn into two pieces like cloth. Not only that, the two spirits that were cut in half started to shatter and collapse at a speed visible to the naked eye, starting from where Gray's sword had slashed them. That feeling was like watching fireworks burn. In the end, the two spirits completely disappeared into the air, and the temperature in the room suddenly became less cold. Only the magic sword in Gray's hand was still blooming with blue-white lightning, reflecting everyone's pale but relieved expressions. What the hell is going on? How can there be such a thing as a ghost? The woman's voice trembled slightly. I heard that under some special circumstances, after a person dies, their soul will not dissipate. Instead, it will be imprisoned in the surroundings and become an unconscious spirit. The purple-haired woman, Sophia, said. Her voice was unexpectedly calm. I originally thought that it was just a fiction. I didn't expect it to really exist. Gray's expression was unusually ugly as he thought of himself. Back then, he was probably like this as well. After his death, under special circumstances, his soul did not dissipate. Of course, there were also differences. His soul mysteriously came to this world from his original world and even took over the body of a severely injured youth. And according to the purple-haired girl, Sophia, these souls that had turned into specters were imprisoned near the place of death and would not leave. Moreover, they had turned into something similar to wild beasts. There was no meaning to it, and it was even more impossible for them to cross over from one world to another. He just did not know if these spirits would take over other people's bodies like he did back then. Miss, what do we do now? Teresa, the man with brown sideburns, frowned and asked. Even he could not help but feel uneasy about encountering such things. Light the torches and go find a manager of the caravan. I'm afraid we're not the only ones who were attacked. Sophia said in a low voice. I wonder how the situation is over there. Everyone hurriedly used some of the wood in the room as torches. Each person held a torch and opened the door and walked out. Ah, help, don't come over, don't come over. It was chaos in the alleys of the village. Dozens of spirits, emitting a pale white light, pounced on the people of the caravan with bared fangs and claws. Screams were incessant. Some people were so frightened that they staggered to avoid them. Their pants were wet. It was unknown whether they peed in their pants or were wet from the rain on the ground. Some unlucky ones were pounced on by the spirits and fell straight to the ground. Their eyes were blank and their bodies could not help but tremble. There were also people who noticed the weakness of the spirits. They held torches and threw them wildly at the spirits. As for the spirits that were hit, they let out a sharp cry and quickly dodged. When Gray and the other four came out of the house with torches in their hands, this was the scene they saw. Help! The 5 of them were blood warriors after all, and were not ordinary people. They had calmed down and quickly went forward to help. A caravan guard who was running away in fear stepped on a pothole. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. Behind him, a spirit chased after him. He crawled backward, but the spirit was getting closer and closer. Crackle, crackle! Just as the spirit was about to pounce on him, he suddenly saw a flash of blue and white light, accompanied by the sound of thunder and lightning. Woo! Then he saw the spirit that was chasing him suddenly break into 2 parts. It let out a sharp scream and then dissipated like fireworks. Don't come over! Don't come over! A woman in charge of logistics was forced into a corner by the spirits. Her body could not help but tremble. At this moment, a torch appeared and branded the spirit's body like a soldering iron. The spirit screamed and retreated, but the bearded man with the torch chased after it. The torch in his hand continuously branded the spirit's body. The spirit seemed to have melted, and its body became incomplete. Finally, it disappeared completely. The same thing happened again and again. Ordinary attacks were completely ineffective against these specters, but when faced with lightning and flames, which had a suppressive effect on them, they became extremely weak. Not to mention the lightning that was wrapped around Gray's magic sword that could kill a high-ranking blood warrior in one strike. Even an ordinary torch could cause a certain amount of damage upon contact. A few more strikes would be enough to kill them all the same. Dozens of spirits were quickly killed by the caravan people and Gray's group who reacted. A head count found that a total of 24 people had died under the attacks of the spirits. Most of these people had died in their sleep. As for the spirits taking over the human bodies that Gray was most worried about, it did not seem to have happened. At least for now, all the people who were alive were acting normal. It did not seem like their bodies had been taken over by an unknown existence. Thank you, noble masters and ladies, for your help." It seemed that the old man in charge of the caravan was very lucky and did not die. His face was pale, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He walked over to Gray and the others and thanked them repeatedly. "No need." The purple-haired girl, Sophia, shook her head and said, "Although we found the spirits and killed them all, it's best that we leave this village as soon as possible." "You're right, my lady." The old man nodded repeatedly and went to give instructions. After burning the corpses of the dead and packing up the tents, the caravan and Gray's group of 5 quickly left the village as if they were fleeing. After leaving the village, they lit up their lanterns and moved forward. It was not until dawn, when they were far away from the village, that the caravan stopped completely to rest and prepare breakfast. Everyone was still in a state of shock. Such an experience was probably something they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Gray even felt that many of these people must have suffered psychological trauma and were so frightened that they developed mental illnesses. Of course, there were no psychologists in this world. In fact, Gray himself was scared out of his wits. Even though he already had the strength of a ferocious blood warrior, he could not help but be frightened by these mysterious spirits that were ineffective against ordinary attacks. However, he was slightly better than these people. These spirits were not as fast as ordinary beasts in terms of movement speed. The only trouble was that ordinary attacks were ineffective, and people who touched them would not be able to control their bodies. Chapter 157. After breakfast, the caravan continued their journey. When the sun set in the afternoon, they did not seek shelter in a nearby village. Instead, they set up camp in the open. The previous night's stay in an uninhabited village had already made everyone in the caravan nervous. Even if it was an obviously inhabited village, the caravan had no intention of seeking shelter. The caravan set up camp and prepared dinner. Gray left the carriage and walked towards a nearby forest. He wanted to find a secluded place to train. He had not had time to train last night because of the storm. This morning, he did not get enough sleep because of the spirit. Therefore, he did not train. Today, he slept for a few hours in the carriage and finally made up for his lack of sleep. He began his routine blood technique training. Whoosh! As he cultivated the blood technique, wild wind started to blow in an empty space in the forest that he had purposely found. The wind spiraled and blew at the surrounding leaves. From time to time, the fallen leaves would be swept into the wind. In this clearing, an extremely small tornado was formed. A hazy green light gathered and arranged itself in a regular pattern. A green wolf gradually became clear, and finally, it was no different from a real squall wolf. Gray was immersed in his training. He seemed to have become a squall wolf that could control the wind. He was hunting, growling, and growing. After more than 40 minutes, the green squall wolf shattered and the green light disappeared. Gray had ended his training. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Gray returned to the caravan. He wanted to take a bath and then hand his clothes over to the servants of the caravan. After walking for a few minutes, he suddenly discovered a strange light coming from a place in the forest. Raising his eyebrows slightly, Gray carefully groped his way in that direction. When he walked out from under a tree that blocked his line of sight, he could not help but narrow his eyes abruptly. In a spacious clearing in the forest, 4 blood fiends stood some distance apart from each other. Among them, there was a blood fiend that was blue in color and had slender limbs. Its body emitted a mysterious aura. There was also a huge blood fiend with 2 horns on its head and a body that was as thick as a rock. There was also a blood fiend that was dark green in color and had 4 limbs that were like 2 large knives. It looked like an enlarged version of a praying mantis. There were also bird-type blood fiends that had orange fur all over their bodies, long legs, and sharp beaks. No, this isn't a blood beast. It's an external manifestation of the cultivation of blood arts. However, Gray quickly discovered that even though these blood fiends looked extremely real, there were some differences between them and real blood fiends. They were not real blood fiends. This was because these blood fiends did not have the agility of real blood fiends. Moreover, they did not move at all, as if they were statues. However, this did not make Gray feel relieved. Instead, it made Gray even more shocked. 4 or more ferocious blood warriors. He had already learned from Viscount Fergus that the appearance of a blood beast during cultivation was a phenomenon that would only appear when a ferocious blood warrior or an existence at a higher level cultivated. In other words, the strength of the 4 people here was at least at the ferocious blood warrior level, or even higher. It's those 4, because of the blood beast's shadow, Gray could not see what the 4 people looked like. However, it was not difficult for him to deduce their identities. Those who appeared in this area were definitely from the merchant group. As for the merchant group, he could almost eliminate them. After all, if the merchant group had 4 or more ferocious blood warriors, they would definitely not do such a small business that would only earn them a dozen or so gold coins. Putting everything else aside, if the 4 of them worked together, killing the blood fiends would not be a problem at all. Just killing one blood fiend would net them a profit of thousands of gold coins. This was much more profitable than following the merchant group. Apart from the merchant group, there was only one other answer: the purple-haired girl Sophia and the other 3. Although I felt that Sophia and the other 3 were not weak last night, I did not expect them to be this strong. When he was dealing with the spirit last night, he could clearly feel that the 4 of them were not weak. Of course, he did not know how strong they were. After all, the spirit moved slowly and did not need to be fast. What exactly is Sophia's identity? Among the 4, Sophia, the youngest, was clearly the leader. To be able to enjoy the following and protection of 3 existences who were at least ferocious blood warriors, Sophia's identity was definitely not simple. To be able to become a ferocious blood warrior at such a young age, or even beyond that, Sophia's talent is not simple either. Gray had been able to attain his current strength at such a young age because of his metamorphosis ability. According to the original aptitude of this body, it would be a problem for the current Gray to become a middle-level ferocious blood warrior. However, Sophia obviously did not possess this metamorphosis ability, yet she had grown to such an extent. The large amount of cultivation resources was the reason, but Sophia's innate talent could not be ruled out. Without the corresponding innate talent, it was impossible for her to grow so quickly. To avoid being discovered by the 4 and causing unnecessary conflict, Gray quietly retreated. When he returned to the caravan, as expected, Sophia and the other 3 were not in the caravan. Evidently, the 4 people in the forest were indeed Sophia and the other 3. More than 10 days later, a majestic city appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The city walls were as tall and thick as mountains, built from huge stones. They stretched endlessly into the distance, with no end in sight. The huge metal gates were thick and sturdy, more than 10 meters tall. Arriving in front of the gates was like entering a kingdom of giants. On top of the city walls, there were elite soldiers in black leather armor patrolling back and forth from time to time. Sometimes they could even see blood warriors in battle armor patrolling. Oka City, the largest city in Marquis, Oka's territory. It was a city with a population of 1 million. Seeing this city, everyone in the caravan finally heaved a sigh of relief. Their nerves, which had been stretched taut for more than 10 days, were finally relaxed like a loosened bowstring. After encountering the specter, the caravan had been extremely cautious. They had been camping and had not entered the nearby villages to seek shelter. Everyone's nerves were like a taut bowstring, stretched taut at all times. They would often wake up from their sleep with cold sweat on their foreheads. Now, they had finally arrived at their destination. It was just that many of them had plans to leave the caravan and change careers to do other things. That kind of unknown death was really too terrifying. Although they had encountered bandits before and had companions killed by the bandits' blades, in terms of the degree of terror, it was far less terrifying than dying under the possession of specters. "We're here." Looking out of the carriage window, Gray looked at the people and carriages bustling in and out of the city with great interest. He had already shaken off the influence of the specter's attack. In the end, specters were just a type of creature that mutated after a person died. Although these creatures were special, they were not unkillable. It only required special methods, such as fire and lightning. Now that he knew how to kill them, and the weapon in his hand happened to be the nemesis of this type of specter, he could easily kill it the next time he encountered one. We're finally here. The woman in orange battle armor heaved a sigh of relief. Yes, we're finally here. The woman in red battle armor also heaved a sigh of relief. Looking at the expressions on their faces, it seemed that they still hadn't shaken off the influence of the specter. Although they were powerful blood warriors, they were women after all. Their courage was far less than men's. After encountering this kind of unknown creature, the influence was far from being eliminated in a short time. On the contrary, Gray saw Sophia in a new light. Even in the face of a specter's attack, she could still maintain her composure and recall the weaknesses of specters recorded in books. At her age, this kind of calmness was rare. The caravan entered the city. Gray, Sophia, and the other three left the caravan and went their separate ways. Chapter 158. After leaving the caravan, Gray found a tavern, booked a high-end room, and went to sleep. He was really not used to sleeping in a tent for several days in a row, and because he was in the wilderness, he did not dare to sleep too deeply, so the quality of his sleep could be said to be very poor. Now, his top priority was to catch up on sleep. As for how to get to the ruins from Oka City, he would think about it after he woke up. It was not until the next morning that he woke up refreshed. After waking up, he finished his morning training in the training room in the room. His stomach was growling with hunger, so he walked out of the room and went to the restaurant downstairs. At this time, there were many people eating in the restaurant. They were all dressed differently. Some were wearing silk clothes, some were dressed like wealthy merchants, and some were dressed like leather armor mercenaries. They were all people who stayed in this tavern. Gray's arrival immediately attracted the attention of these people. Some people looked at Gray with curiosity, while others looked at Gray with caution and caution. Gray's clothes were of high quality, and it could not be bought without a few gold coins. The style was quite aristocratic, so it was obvious that this was a noble young master. But what made them feel strange was that this noble young master in front of them did not have any servants or guards by his side, but was alone. "Young master, what would you like to eat?" A tavern clerk came forward and respectfully handed over the menu, and asked politely. Gray took the menu and looked at it. There were many dishes on it, but what was good could not be judged by the name alone. After all, he had never heard of these names before. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What is the best food in your tavern?" "Our tavern's dishes are all very good. If you want to talk about the best, it would be stewed with peas and lamb." "Young master, do you want one?" The tavern clerk subconsciously licked his lips and said. When it came to stewed with peas and lamb, he could not help but recall the taste of the stewed with peas and lamb. He was lucky enough to eat it once. The crispy peas, rich soup, and tender lamb meat. That taste, even now, was still unforgettable. It was definitely delicious. He was sure that even the young master in front of him would be full of praise after eating it. Of course, the food was delicious, but it was also very expensive. A serving cost 20 copper coins, but he believed that the young master in front of him was definitely not someone who could not afford it. After working as a waiter in the tavern for so long, he still had a discerning eye. "Then give me 4 servings." Gray nodded. "All right." The waiter's face immediately bloomed into a smile. He didn't even ask about the price before ordering. It seemed that his guess was right. The young master in front of him was indeed a rich man. But in the next moment, he suddenly froze and hurriedly looked at Gray to confirm. "Young master, is it 4 servings?" "Yes, I want 4 portions." "Okay, please wait a moment." The tavern clerk glanced at Gray with a puzzled look, bowed slightly, and left. In his heart, he was wondering if Gray still had companions who hadn't arrived yet. Soon, 4 servings of pea and lamb stew were served on the table. Gray, whose stomach was already growling from hunger, picked up his knife and fork and started eating. The lamb meat was indeed very tender, and the soup was extremely rich. The peas were placed at the right time, and there was a crispy feeling when eating. Of course, that was all. When Gray was at the Fergus family, he had always enjoyed the food meticulously cooked by the head chef, who had extraordinary culinary skills. Furthermore, the dishes were never repeated for a month. His mouth had long been picky. Therefore, The food that the waiter thought was delicious was just so in Gray's eyes. Soon, he had finished one serving. Then, he pushed the plate aside and reached for the other serving. He wants to eat the second serving? Gray's attire was already very eye-catching. In addition, he had ordered 4 servings on the table by himself. Therefore, there were already people looking in his direction. At first, they thought that Gray had companions. However, even after Gray had eaten for a long time, there were still no companions. They were basically certain that Gray was alone. The portion of pea and lamb stew was quite large. Under normal circumstances, it would be enough for even an adult. So why did he order 4 servings? They couldn't help but guess Gray's intentions. In the end, they came to an acceptable conclusion. This noble young master had too much money to spend. He liked to eat 1 and throw away 3 servings. Therefore, when Gray was about to eat the second serving, the expressions in these people's eyes couldn't help but be slightly surprised. This young master's appetite wasn't bad. He could actually finish 1 serving and eat a second serving. The third serving. The fourth serving. However, as Gray began to eat the third and fourth serving, the surprise in these people's eyes slowly turned into astonishment. This young master has such a big appetite. Eating is too much, isn't it? This is a gluttonous monster. Possessed, right? If the person in front of them was a burly man, they might be able to reluctantly accept it. However, Gray was the type that leaned towards the lean and lean type. He was obviously not burly at all. This was too surprising. Of course, although they were surprised, these people didn't ridicule Gray. What a joke. Gray's clothes clearly showed that he was either rich or respectable. Obviously, he wasn't someone they could afford to offend. Gray naturally noticed the strange looks these people gave him. However, these people didn't ridicule him. He couldn't be bothered to pay attention to them. In fact, after following the caravan for more than 10 days, he was already used to such looks. After breakfast, returning to the hotel room, Gray took out the map of Marquis Oka's territory and the map of the ruins. He spread them out on the table and began to consider his next itinerary. The ruins are located at this location in the Jade Sea Forest. From the map, the place closest to the ruins is here. Comparing the 2 maps, he quickly found the place closest to the Imperial Ruins in Marquis Oka's territory. This was a small town called Usnia Town. Judging from the geographical location, this town was the closest place to the Imperial Ruins in the Jade Sea Forest. It will take about 3 to 4 days to get to Usnia Town. How do I get there? Gray couldn't help but think about how to get to this place called Usnia Town. Gray's first thought was to take the caravan in that direction. After all, this was the most convenient way. However, in the end, he shook his head. These 10 days of traveling with the caravan, although it did save him a lot of trouble, it also made him see the disadvantages of traveling with the caravan. First of all, traveling with the caravan, it was difficult to find a suitable place to train. After all, it couldn't be seen by the people of the caravan, and it couldn't be too far away from the caravan. Such a place was not easy to find. Secondly, and also the thing that Gray couldn't stand the most, since it was a caravan, it was bound to carry a lot of goods. This caused their speed to be extremely slow. For example, this time, the journey that was supposed to take 7 to 8 days took more than 10 days to arrive. People who were afraid of encountering bandits and didn't have the strength to protect themselves, traveling with the caravan was indeed the best way. After all, the caravan had many people and there were guards to protect them. However, Gray obviously wasn't afraid of ordinary bandits, so there was no need to travel with the caravan. If I don't take the caravan, then I can only go by horse. Chapter 159. An hour later, after spending more than 10 gold coins, he bought a horse that could only be considered average in Gray's eyes. Gray left Oka City and headed in the direction of Usnia Town. At noon, Gray ate some dry rations with water and practiced a round of blood techniques before continuing on his journey. In the afternoon, when the sun was about to set, he was very lucky to arrive at a city. This was a slightly dilapidated city. The low walls, the wooden city gate with signs of insect damage, and the yawning veterans at the gate all showed the dilapidated appearance of this city. Entering the city, the houses in the city were as old as Gray expected. The walls were dark, and there were even holes in some places. The roof tiles were covered in moss, and one could tell that these houses had not been renovated for a long time. Beside the houses, one could occasionally see some residents of this city. They wore patched clothes and looked curiously at Gray, a stranger who had come to this remote city. Riding on his horse, Gray walked on the streets of the city that were not very spacious. His eyes were looking for a tavern. After a while, he found the place he was looking for. The house was two-story and was also built for a long time. Because it was taken care of very diligently, the roof tiles were not covered in moss, and there were not many spider webs around the house. At the entrance, there was a crooked wooden board with the words "Old Cat Tavern" written on it. "Young master, do you want to stay or have a meal?" Seeing Gray jump down from his horse, a skinny young man greeted him with a smile on his face. As he spoke, his eyes looked up and down at Gray, and the smile on his face widened. From his experience, he judged that this was a rich young master. "Both." Gray nodded lightly and said, "Feed my horse some fodder, and we'll calculate it together later." "Okay, young master, please come in." The skinny young man took the reins of Gray's horse and then gestured to Gray to go in. He led Gray's horse to the stable. Gray walked into the tavern. Just as he had expected, it wasn't a very big tavern. There was a counter on the inside facing the door, but there was no one inside. There was a staircase to the side, and on the right side, there were 5 tables and chairs. At this moment, 2 of the 5 tables and chairs were occupied. At one of the tables, there were 4 men dressed in leather armor and dressed like mercenaries. There were some side dishes on the table, and they were sipping on ale. On the other side sat 2 men and a woman, a middle-aged man, a young man, and a delicate and pretty young woman. The 3 of them were also dressed like mercenaries in leather armor. The young man and the middle-aged man were drinking ale while the young woman was having her meal. On her back, there was a longbow. Gray's arrival immediately attracted the attention of the people at the 2 tables. The table of 2 men and 1 woman glanced at Gray and then looked away. The 4 men, however, looked at Gray with a sizing-up look in their eyes. They looked at Gray for a while and then looked away. "Young master, what do you need?" Not long after, the skinny young man from before turned back. "What do you have here?" The young man didn't have a menu in his hand. He didn't know if it was because he wasn't professional enough or because the tavern was too small to have a menu. "Our tavern is potato bread, fried tilapia, radish stew. Give me 4 servings of the best food in your restaurant." Gray listened for a while and interrupted the young man. They were all things that he had never heard of. To be on the safe side, it was better to let the young man recommend. "Okay, young master, our restaurant's best dish is fried ham. Are you sure you want 4 servings?" "Yes." Gray nodded. Once again, he shocked the people in the tavern by eating 4 servings of food. Gray checked into a room and then went up to the 2nd floor under the guidance of the skinny young man. "Bill." After sending Gray to the room, the skinny young man had just walked down the stairs when he heard one of the men at the table of 4 shouting. A total of 17 copper coins. The skinny young man quickly ran over and said, "The 3 of us want to stay. 2 rooms for 1 night." The man said, "A room is 5 copper coins a night. That's a total of 27 copper coins." The skinny young man said. Under the guidance of the skinny young man, the 4 of them went up the stairs to the 2nd floor. "Big brother, those 4 guys are up to no good. I'm afraid they have their eyes on that young man." The young woman lowered her voice and said with a frown, "It has nothing to do with us." The young man shook his head slightly and interrupted the young woman. But the young woman still wanted to say something. "Those 4 are very strong. I've seen them when I accepted a mission. These 4 have the strength of a low-level blood warrior." The middle-aged man shook his head. "If we really get into a conflict with them, it will only be disadvantageous to us. The 4 of them have the strength of a low-level blood warrior?" The young woman's eyes widened. Fear appeared on her face, and she no longer mentioned the previous matter. Among the 3 of them, only the middle-aged man had the strength of a low-level blood warrior. Although her big brother was close to the strength of a low-level blood warrior, he was still a little off. As for herself, the gap between her and a low-level blood warrior was even greater. The reason she became a mercenary was that she was good at archery and tracking. With this kind of strength, if they got into a conflict with those 4 people, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. Her current thought was to get as far away as possible. As for that young man, although she sympathized with him, there was nothing she could do. She could not possibly get into a conflict with those 4 people just to protect that young man, right? But we've already booked a room. What should we do? However, she immediately remembered that they had already booked a room and even put their luggage in the room. The middle-aged man frowned slightly and said, "Those 4 guys have their eyes on that young man. They probably won't care about us, but we still have to be careful tonight." In the dead of night, the purple crescent moon in the sky shone into the corridor through the window on the 2nd floor of the hotel, dyeing the corridor a hazy purple. Creak! 2 soft sounds of the door opening could be heard. 2 heads poked out from each of the 2 adjacent rooms. The 2 sides looked at each other and then slowly walked out of the room. Without making the slightest sound, they tiptoed toward the end of the corridor. At the end of the corridor, near the window, there was the best room in the entire hotel. This room was rarely occupied, but there was someone staying in it today, and this person was Gray. The 4 people came to the room Gray was staying in. Seeing that there was no light coming from inside, they leaned against the door and listened to the inside of the room. After confirming that there was no movement, one of them took out a finger-length incense-like object under the moonlight. He lit it and then flicked it in through the ventilation hole on the door. This was a kind of knockout incense that they had spent a lot of money to purchase. After burning, it would emit a kind of white smoke. Anyone who smelled this white smoke would fall into a coma. According to the pharmacist who sold it, even a high-level blood warrior or a ferocious blood warrior would not be able to resist it. The only drawback was that this incense would emit a faint fragrance in addition to white smoke. It could not be made colorless and odorless. However, in this kind of situation, it obviously did not affect it. The room was pitch black, so there was no white smoke. As for the fragrance, since the person in the room was already asleep, the fragrance would not affect it. The 3 of them secretly calculated the time in their hearts. They felt that 5 minutes had already passed, and the effects of the incense should have already taken effect. The 4 of them covered themselves with a black cloth that was smeared with a special potion. They took out a dagger and inserted it into the gap of the door. They gently pried open the door bit by bit. Patter! Their movements were very skillful. It was obvious that this was not the first time they had done something like this. Soon, the wood was pried open. The 4 of them gently pushed the door open and looked inside. Chapter 160. How is this possible? Suddenly, a panicked expression appeared on all 4 of their faces. In front of their line of sight, a figure was standing there quietly, facing their direction. With the help of the weak moonlight, they could vaguely tell that it was Gray. "You, how could you not have fainted?" One of the men was slightly incoherent. Because of this, Gray sneered. He lifted his leg and kicked lightly. A small piece of something was kicked in front of the 4 of them. The 4 of them looked at it with the help of the moonlight in the corridor and realized that it was the incense they had just thrown into the room. "Do you think I don't know that you have your eyes on me?" Gray looked at the 4 of them coldly. His infrared perception ability allowed him to see the 4 of them clearly. The young woman could see that the 4 of them were up to no good. So how could he not see it? Although he had been sleeping, he had been on guard all along. When this small piece of incense was thrown in, he had already reacted and stepped forward to extinguish the incense. "You know that we have our eyes on you?" The 4 of them looked at Gray with fear, feeling that things were going to be a little difficult. Originally, they were only after wealth. Now that the other party knew that it was the 4 of them, even if they escaped now, what awaited them would be the pursuit of the forces behind this young man. Under the hazy, purple moonlight in the corridor, a ruthless look flashed in the eyes of the 4 of them. Finally, they made a decision. We only wanted your belongings. Don't blame us. Blame yourself for not fainting." Since they would have to face the pursuit of the forces behind him regardless of whether they killed him or not, they might as well kill him directly, rob him of his belongings, and then leave immediately. As for whether they were a match for him, it did not even cross their minds. Although the 4 of them were not blood warriors, their strength was not inferior to a low-level blood warrior through hard training. With the 4 of them working together, even a middle-level blood warrior could be killed. They did not believe that the other party was a match for them. Clang! The sound of weapons being drawn rang out. Almost at the same time, the four of them drew their weapons. Ruthless looks flashed across the faces of the four of them. They immediately prepared to rush into the room and surround Gray. At this moment, Gray moved one step ahead of them. Whoosh! Gray took a step forward and appeared in the corridor. The bluish-white sword emitted a demonic glow under the purple moonlight. Puff! The man at the front didn't even have time to react before Gray's sword pierced his heart. He really didn't expect that Gray would actually dare to attack first when facing the four of them. Patter! Next to him, the other two companions were shocked by the speed that Gray displayed at this time. Cold sweat broke out on their foreheads as they swung their weapons at Gray in horror. Puff, puff! However, before their weapons could land, a bluish-white light flashed by at lightning speed. Then they felt a pain in their throats. They wanted to scream in pain, but they couldn't make a single sound. They could only hold their necks and gasp for air as they fell weakly to the ground. Bastard! The remaining man's back was already soaked in cold sweat. He didn't expect 3 of his companions to die like this. He gritted his teeth and viciously stabbed his sword at Gray. However, in the face of his sword, Gray only needed to lean to the side to avoid it. Then he stabbed out with his sword. Puff! The long sword pierced through the man's heart and out of his back. The man's movements were stiff. Patter! The long sword was pulled back, and the man fell weakly to the ground with a dull thud. After wiping the sword clean on the man's clothes, Gray sheathed the sword. He glanced at the 4 corpses and didn't squat down to search them. According to his estimation, the 4 of them didn't have much money on them. Of course, this was relative to him. Now that they were stained with blood, he really wasn't interested in taking it. Avoiding the blood on the floor, he returned to the room and closed the door again. Because he intentionally avoided the blood splattered by the 4 of them, there wasn't even a speck of blood on his body. Oomph! Putting the sword at the head of the bed, he snorted coldly and fell back to sleep. The reason why he wanted to make the first move before the 4 of them rushed into the room was to prevent their blood from splattering in the room and filling the room with the smell of blood, which would affect his sleep. As for the 4 corpses outside the door, compared to the spirit, the 4 corpses were nothing. After encountering the spirit, he felt that he had become much bolder. The next morning, the skinny young man woke up early and went to the 2nd floor of the hotel. His daily morning work began with mopping the floor. He usually mopped from the 2nd floor to the ground floor. When he came to the 2nd floor, he couldn't help but look at the corridor by the window. There lived a very strange young master with a terrifying appetite. Last night, he ate 4 servings. The next moment, he let out a scream of horror. At the end of the corridor, by the window, 4 people were lying there stiffly. The ground around them was covered with dry blood. There was no doubt that the 4 of them were dead. He ran downstairs in a panic and informed the tavern owner, who was also the chef. Not long after, an old man in his 50s accompanied him to the 4 corpses. The 2 of them looked at the 4 corpses in front of them, their faces full of panic. After all, they were ordinary people, suddenly encountering people being killed in their tavern. And the people who were killed were people who stayed in their tavern. The 2 of them couldn't help but feel awkward. For a moment, they didn't know what to do. Creak! At this moment, the doors of the other 2 rooms were opened. The 3 mercenaries from last night, 2 men and 1 woman, walked out of the rooms. In fact, they had already heard the commotion last night, but they didn't open the door to check. If they did, it was likely that they would be involved in unnecessary trouble, so they pretended not to know. The 3 of them came to the corpses. Their eyes swept over the corpses, and their pupils shrank. Killed in one blow. The wounds on the 4 of them were either at the throat or the chest where the heart was. All of them were vital parts of the body, and they were killed in one blow. Obviously, the strength of the person who killed them far surpassed the 4 of them. What shocked them even more was that the 4 people here were not ordinary people. The 4 of them had the strength of a low-level blood warrior, but even so, they were still killed in one blow. Moreover, the 4 of them were together. How strong was the person who killed them? Middle-level blood warrior or upper-level blood warrior? The young woman's eyes were filled with horror. She naturally knew who the 4 of them were targeting, so it went without saying who the person who killed the four of them was. It was hard to imagine that such a young man could easily kill four people who were comparable to low-level blood warriors. How strong was this young man? To think that she had worried about him yesterday. She had worried for nothing. The middle-aged man and the young man's eyes were filled with intense fear. If the young man could kill the four of them so easily, it would be even easier for him to deal with them. After all, among the three of them, there was only one who had the strength of a low-level blood warrior. Creak! Suddenly, the sound of the door opening sounded, and Gray appeared at the doorway. The young woman, young man, and middle-aged man almost subconsciously took a few steps back, looking at Gray with fear. On the contrary, the tavern owner and the skinny young man didn't know that the person who killed them was Gray. They continued to look at the four corpses with distressed and pale faces. Glancing at the three people who were retreating, Gray withdrew his gaze and said to the tavern owner and the skinny young man, "They should have a lot of money on them. The four of them should have quite a bit of money on them. Let's just take it as payment for collecting their corpses." Uh-huh. The tavern owner and the skinny young man nodded subconsciously, then suddenly reacted and looked at Gray in shock. They weren't fools. The four of them died in front of Gray's door, and Gray even asked them to collect their corpses. It went without saying how they died. Gray ignored them, carrying his bag and walking downstairs. With people dead in this tavern, the chef was definitely not in the mood to cook, so he might as well eat somewhere else. So scary. A long time after Gray left, the young woman patted her chest and let out a sigh of relief. The moment Gray looked at them, she felt as if her entire body had been frozen, and she didn't even dare to move. These four fellows have really hit a wall this time. The middle-aged man shook his head helplessly. Chapter 161. During the day, he would try his best to find a tavern to spend the night. If he couldn't find one, he would spend the night in the village. 4 days later, Gray arrived at Greenvine Town. It took one more day than expected because Gray had never been to Greenvine Town before, so he took a lot of detours. Greenvine Town was a place that was bigger than a town, but smaller than a city. It had a population of 8,000. Riding into Greenvine Town, Gray casually looked around town. After a while, he couldn't help but frown. Why are there so many mercenaries? As one of the towns near the Jade Sea Forest, it was normal for mercenaries to come here to hunt wild beasts and obtain their fur. But at this moment, there were people dressed like mercenaries everywhere. Moreover, he even saw a few people wearing battle armor. This was quite abnormal. Normal mercenaries hunting wild beasts and selling their fur was normal, but why were blood warriors here? With the money earned from hunting wild beasts, even if they worked hard for a few years, they might not be able to afford their battle armor. In terms of efficiency, hunting wild beasts was very inefficient. With doubts in his heart, Gray continued to wander around the town. Finally, he walked into a tavern that seemed to be of good quality. Giving the horse to the waiter to feed, Gray walked into the tavern. As soon as he entered the tavern, there was a lot of noise. The sound of drinking got louder and louder. Gray looked over and found that they were all mercenaries wearing leather armor. They were in groups of 3 to 5, occupying a table, ordering a few dishes, holding a low-quality ale in their hands, drinking and blowing. Many people's faces were red, obviously drunk. But even so, Gray's entrance still attracted the attention of these people. After all, Gray's attire was out of place in the tavern full of mercenaries. This attire, he's a noble young master. A noble young master. Why'd he come here? And he doesn't seem to have any guards. Many mercenaries looked at Gray curiously. What? This set of clothes is definitely high-end goods. I'm afraid it's worth this much. An old mercenary who had seen much of the world stared at Gray's clothes and extended 5 fingers. 50 silver coins? So expensive? Hearing his words, a young mercenary beside him was shocked. They were low-level mercenaries who hunted wild beasts. Even in a year, they could not earn more than a few dozen silver coins. Yet, the clothes on the noble young master in front of him were actually worth 50 silver coins. His eyes were filled with envy. Bah, 50 silver coins? Little ham, you're too inexperienced, aren't you? 5 gold coins, and it's at least. The middle-aged mercenary put away 4 of his fingers, leaving only his index finger, and waved it in front of the young mercenary. "What, 5 gold coins, this, the young mercenary stuttered. With their current income, it would take them at least 10 years to earn 5 gold coins. Yet, the clothes on the noble young master in front of them were worth this much. In other words, the money they earned in 10 years was only enough to buy a set of clothes for this young master, and it might not even be enough. For a moment, his heart was filled with shock, envy, jealousy, and all sorts of emotions. A noble young master who ran away from home without any guards. Among the gazes that looked at Gray, besides curiosity and shock, there was also another kind of gaze. That was a gaze of greed, and there were quite a few of them. Indeed, nobles had great power. If one offended a noble, even if they did not die, they would lose a layer of skin. Thus, most mercenaries did not dare to offend nobles. However, when the benefits were large enough, even mercenaries who usually bowed to the nobles would sometimes suddenly explode and make a move on these high and mighty nobles. Once they did a job, they would be able to escape thousands of miles away, and they would be able to escape the pursuit of the nobles. This was enough to make mercenaries, who usually looked obedient and honest, take the risk. Moreover, mercenaries were rarely honest. Moreover, the truth was that Gray had more than 20,000 gold coins on him. If there really was a mercenary who robbed Gray, it would not only be for a lifetime, but even for several lifetimes it would be enough. Whether it was the mercenaries with curious and envious gazes, or the mercenaries with greedy gazes, none of them noticed that in a corner of the tavern there were 3 mercenaries with extremely pale faces. These 3 people were a middle-aged man, a young man, and a young woman. These were the 3 mercenaries that Gray had met in the remote city. Because Gray had never been to Green Vine Town before, he took a lot of detours and arrived at Green Vine Town a day later than expected. As a result, the 3 people who were supposed to be behind him reached Green Vine Town before him. "These guys are looking for death." The young man glanced at the tables of greedy mercenaries as if he was looking at dead people and shook his head secretly. Why did he come to Green Vine Town? The young woman, on the other hand, was curious. "I'm not sure. He will probably stay in this tavern tonight. Let's quickly leave after we finish eating," the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. He could already imagine what was going to happen in the tavern tonight. Now, he wanted to hide as far away as possible. "It seems that I really need to change into a normal set of clothes." Feeling the greedy gazes, Gray felt helpless. He was not afraid of these mercenaries, but that did not mean that he was willing to be harassed by a group of fish that smelled blood. He glanced around the tavern and finally found an empty table to sit down. "Young master, what would you like to order?" A tavern clerk came forward and handed over the menu and respectfully asked. Gray waved his hand and stopped the clerk from handing over the menu. "Give me 4 servings of your best dishes," Wang Yao said. "Okay." The tavern clerk looked at Gray doubtfully. He did not understand why Gray wanted to order 4 dishes, but he quickly nodded. Although Gray's attire was eye-catching, after the initial attention, whether it was curiosity or greed, they all moved their gazes away. After all, if you kept staring at someone, everyone would know that you had bad intentions. The people in the tavern continued to drink and chat. "Have you heard? The giant crocodile mercenary group is also here. The giant crocodile mercenary group is also here." Hearing this news, some mercenaries could not help but frown. The giant crocodile mercenary group was one of the more famous mercenary groups in Marquis Oka's territory. It was said that this mercenary group had ferocious warriors in charge. It was not on the same level as these small mercenary groups. "Are they also here for the green vine grass?" Some mercenaries doubted. "Definitely." Some mercenaries nodded and then said worriedly, "Coming for the green vine grass is secondary. All of us are here for the green vine grass. It's just that I heard that the giant crocodile mercenary group does not have a good reputation. I'm afraid that they will rob us in the forest." "It can't be that bad. We have so many people. Aren't they afraid of provoking public anger?" Some mercenaries were bewildered. "It's hard to say. Although we have many people, we are scattered. You all know the strength of the giant crocodile mercenary group." Someone's voice was filled with worry. Under the astonished gazes of the people in the tavern, Gray ate a meal for 4 and booked the best room in the tavern. Under the guidance of a waiter, Gray walked up the stairs to the upper floor of the tavern. "Young master, this is your room." The clerk led Gray to the best room and opened the door for Gray. Gray walked in and looked around. He was satisfied. The room was quite big and had a private bathroom. There was even a cultivation room. "Is there anything else?" The clerk asked politely. "What is the green vine grass?" Gray asked curiously. When he heard the mercenaries chatting in the tavern, he found that they were all here for the green vine grass. He could not help but be curious. What exactly was the green vine grass? "Young master, this is a magic herb. The cheapest stock can be sold for a few gold coins. Our Jade Sea Forest is near the Green Vine Village and is rich in green vine grass. These mercenaries are all here to try their luck." "I see." Gray nodded his head in understanding. No wonder there were so many mercenaries here. It turned out that they were here for the usnea grass, a magic herb. Of course, although he knew that the green vine grass was worth a few gold coins, he still had no interest. A stalk of green vine grass was only worth a few gold coins. In terms of the value of magic herbs, it was definitely one of the worst magic herbs. No longer paying attention to the green vine grass, Gray asked, "Is there anyone selling leather armor in this town?" "Yes." The clerk replied. "Go and buy a set for me. You can have a rest." Gray took out 10 silver coins and handed it to the clerk. "Yes, young master. Don't worry, I will buy it for you soon." Feeling the weight of the 10 silver coins in his hand, the clerk's eyes widened. His face was full of smiles as he said. He originally just wanted to try his luck and see if he could earn some tips. That was why he was so attentive to Gray. He did not expect such a good thing to happen. On the second day, a piece of news that was neither big nor small spread around Greenvine Village. Last night, there was a battle in a tavern in Greenvine Village. A total of more than 10 mercenaries were killed. Mercenaries were a group of restless people. They were not satisfied with farming and the current situation of poverty. They used their lives as a bet to win wealth. When such people gathered together, conflicts were very common. Therefore, in Qingluo town, this was not the first time a battle like this had happened. The reason why it was not small was because this time more than 10 people died. Compared to a normal battle of 3 to 5 people, the number of deaths was obviously much higher. Chapter 162. Looking from afar, the Jade Sea Forest looked like a boundless jade sea, which was why it was called the Jade Sea Forest. Dressed in a mercenary's leather armor, Gray stepped into the Jade Sea Forest like an ordinary mercenary. At the same time, there were many mercenaries who entered the Jade Sea Forest with him. Most of them were in groups of 3 to 5, but there were also many who walked alone. Gray mixed in with them. Although he was younger, he was not too conspicuous. It would be great if we could find one this time. Some of the young mercenaries were full of anticipation. A stalk of green radish grass, even if it was the worst-looking one, was worth a few gold coins. Obtaining one stalk was equivalent to a few years of their usual income. They could not help but be excited. Move faster, go deeper. The experienced old mercenaries urged their companions to bring them deeper into the Jade Sea Forest. According to their experience, the deeper they went into the forest, the higher the chances of finding green radish grass. Gray's target was not the green radish grass, so he did not rush into the forest like the other mercenaries. Instead, he walked forward unhurriedly. Even so, his speed was not considered slow. The shadow snake's infrared perception allowed him to clearly sense the dangers hidden in the forest. He did not need to be like the other mercenaries who had to be on guard against dangers that could appear at any time while moving forward. In such a forest, the most dangerous thing was not the tigers or leopards, but the various poisonous snakes hidden in the forest. Although they were wearing leather armor, it was obviously unable to protect the exposed parts of their bodies. If they were bitten by these poisonous snakes and did not take the antidote in time, it was very likely that they would lose their lives. After more than 2 hours, Gray was already more than 10 miles into the forest with a speed that was not considered too slow. Suddenly, he heard the sound of quarreling in front of him. "Hand it over." "On what basis?" "We discovered it first." "Haha, on what basis?" "On the basis that we are from the giant crocodile mercenary group." After walking for a few dozen meters, he saw both sides of the quarrel. On one side, there were 4 men wearing yellow-brown leather armor. On their left arm, there was a wristband. On the wristband, there was a ferocious crocodile. These 4 people should be the ones who claimed to be from the giant crocodile mercenary group. On the other side, there were 3 people. The 3 of them wore leather armor of different colors. It was obvious that they were a team that had been put together at the last minute. At this moment, the 3 of them were surrounded by 4 people from the giant crocodile mercenary group. One of them was holding a plant that was about 10 centimeters tall. It had many wrinkled leaves and was completely green in color. Looks like you really don't intend to hand it over. A member of the giant crocodile mercenary group said with a cold expression, "Dream on. We found it first." Although they were surrounded by 4 people and the situation was very unfavorable for them, the 3 mercenaries did not have the slightest intention of surrendering. A stalk of green radish grass, the cheapest one, was worth a few gold coins. To the mercenaries, it was simply a huge fortune. No matter what, they would not let it go. Attack! The giant crocodile mercenary band's mercenary snorted coldly. His other 3 companions drew their weapons without hesitation and charged at the 3 of them. The 2 sides quickly exchanged blows. Middle-level blood warrior? Are you a blood warrior? Let us go. We're willing to hand it over. Now? It's too late. The battle ended quickly. The giant crocodile mercenary group had more people than the 3 of them. The cold-faced man from the giant crocodile mercenary group had practiced blood techniques and had reached the level of a middle-level blood warrior. Unsurprisingly, the mercenary group formed by the 3 of them was annihilated. Scarlet blood splattered across the open space in the forest. The 3 of them had fallen here. Perhaps they would become food for wild beasts or nutrient for plants. Gray saw the entire scene of the battle, but he had no intention of helping the 3 of them. He quietly avoided the 4 people from the giant crocodile mercenary group from the side and continued on his way to his destination. He had already heard of this giant crocodile mercenary group yesterday. This mercenary group was not weak, and it was very likely that they had vicious blood warriors in charge. It was not worthwhile for him to offend this mercenary group for the sake of these 3 people. After all, he did not have any relationship with them. Of course, the most important thing was that this mercenary group did not provoke him. If they had, he would not have minded fighting with them. With his shadow ability, he was like a fish in water in this forest. Even if the other party was an entire mercenary group, he was not the least bit afraid. Subsequently, he encountered many such disputes. Sometimes, the 2 parties involved were the giant crocodile mercenary group and other small mercenary groups. Sometimes it was between 2 unknown small mercenary groups. With the strength of a vicious blood warrior, Gray discovered them in advance and easily avoided them. He ate some dry rations for lunch. When the sun set in the afternoon, he had already reached a deeper part of the Jade Sea forest. It was very rare to encounter those mercenaries here. At this depth, it was very likely that they would encounter blood fiends. With the strength of those mercenaries, if they really encountered blood fiends, other than the giant crocodile mercenary group, the other mercenary groups would definitely be annihilated. Apart from a few brave individuals, most people did not dare to go this deep. After eating his dry rations, Gray practiced his blood techniques in the afternoon, as usual. He found a cave and sprinkled some medicine that could repel snakes at the entrance of the cave. He patted some hay and laid out a blanket. Just like that, he slept in the cave for the night. Sleeping in the open, and in a cave at that, was really torturous. When Gray woke up the next day, he felt uncomfortable all over. However, he had no choice. If he wanted to go to the ruins, he had to spend the night in the forest. It would be great if I had a ruined space bag. Gray sighed as he stretched his body. A space bag was something that only existed in the imagination of his previous life. In this world, however, it was real. It was just that it was extremely difficult to make, and the materials required were also extremely special. Hence, it was extremely rare. According to Gray's knowledge, the only thing that could be confirmed to Marquis Sidney was that the Sidney family had a space bag. As for whether Count Ford and Count Smalley had one, he did not know. If there really was such a space bag, it would definitely be a must-have for traveling. He could pack a few blankets and quilts and lay them in the cave. It would definitely be much more comfortable than it was now. Of course, it would be even better if he could fit a bed. After finishing his morning blood technique practice, Gray continued on his journey. As he might encounter blood fiends, his movements were much more careful. Splash! The sound of flowing water entered Gray's ears. Gray stood still for a while. After determining the direction of the stream, he walked in that direction. Soon, a small stream that was not too wide appeared in front of him. The clear stream water was so clear that one could see the bottom at a glance. It curved and curved as it hit the rocks by the stream, producing a clear splash sound. Gray did not rashly walk towards the stream. In the forest, many animals like to drink by the stream, and this would attract the hunters of the forest to wait by the stream. He looked around and used his infrared perception to confirm that there were no other animals in the vicinity. Then, he walked towards the west. He scooped up a handful of water and began to wash. There was still plenty of drinking water, but it was absolutely impossible to use it to wash his hands and face. At this moment, the stream water was just right for washing his face. Suddenly, at this moment, rustle, rustle. In the forest behind him, the leaves suddenly shook violently. Then, a huge creature covered in green fur suddenly rushed out and pounced towards him. What's going on? Feeling the huge movement behind him, Gray's expression changed. Just now, he had used his infrared perception to check the surroundings. There shouldn't be any animals in the vicinity. He did not even have time to stand up. He rolled on the ground and rolled to the side. Splash! Not long after he rolled away, the green figure pounced on him. Because Gray had dodged, the green figure could not stop in time and directly fell into the stream water. Large amounts of water splashed up from the stream. Gray, who was beside him, was completely drenched. Drenched like a drowned rat, Gray hurriedly retreated and distanced himself. He looked at the huge creature that had pounced into the stream water. And this huge creature that had fallen into the stream water had already easily climbed to the shore. This was a huge creature covered in green fur. Its body was over 2 meters long. Its limbs were slender and strong, and its toes were full of sharp black claws. Its mouth was slightly protruding. At this moment, it was baring its sharp teeth. Wind wolf. Gray was all too familiar with this appearance. Although he had never seen a wind wolf before, he had, after all, cultivated the blood technique derived by the wind wolf and had seen the oil paintings of the wind wolf. He naturally knew what a wind wolf looked like, so he could tell at a glance that it was a wind wolf. What's going on? Why did my infrared perception just now detect it? From the way this wind wolf had suddenly pounced out of the forest, it must have been lying in ambush in the forest for a long time. But just now, his infrared perception had actually failed to detect it. This was absolutely abnormal. Infrared perception could detect the infrared radiation emitted by animals. Even if the other party was hiding in the forest, it was reasonable to say that he should have been able to find it. He could not help but increase his infrared perception and look at the wind wolf in front of him. I can't sense it, but the result once again shocked him. Even if he increased his infrared perception to the maximum, he still could not detect the wind wolf in front of him. How can this be? Does the wind wolf have the ability to avoid infrared perception? However, Gray rejected this conjecture in the next moment. No, that can't be right. If the wind wolf has such an ability, I should also have such an ability. But clearly I don't. Chapter 163. Could it be a bloodline mutation? Gray thought of another possibility, which was that the wind wolf's body had undergone some sort of mutation, and this mutation gave it the ability to evade infrared perception. Whoosh! At this moment, the wind wolf was already pouncing on him. It was as swift as the wind, like a green phantom, quickly approaching his left side. Its sharp black claws cut through the air and suddenly grabbed at him. Faced with such speed, an ordinary murderous level blood fiend would find it difficult to dodge. However, Gray was not one of them. In terms of speed, he was not inferior to the wind wolf at all. After all, he had the bloodline of the wind wolf. Whoosh! Gray quickly turned around and faced the wind wolf head-on. Then, he shifted his feet slightly and dodged the wind wolf's attack. He drew his sword. The bluish-white demonic sword was like a flash of lightning as he quickly slashed at the wind wolf's throat. Whoosh! Faced with Gray's swift attack, the wind wolf, which was already pouncing on Gray, had no time to dodge. It watched as Gray's sword was about to cut into its throat. Puff! However, Gray's arrow did not manage to cut through the wind wolf's throat. Before that, it was blocked by one of the wind wolf's front limbs. However, the wind wolf, which had blocked the sword, paid a heavy price. The front half of its front limb, together with its claws, was directly chopped off. Dark red blood flowed out. Relying on its 3 remaining legs, the wind wolf pathetically supported its body. Whoosh! Gray was not at all surprised by this outcome. Possessing Hanhu's strength, he was known for his valiant strength among the blood fiends. In addition, the wind wolf's defense was average. Suddenly facing such a powerful sword, it was natural for its front paw to be chopped off. This was the difference between an ordinary blood fiend and him, who possessed the characteristics of 3 types of blood fiends. Whoosh! He lightly stepped on the ground and quickly approached the wind wolf, who was pathetically supporting its body. At the same time, the wind wolf suddenly pounced and bit at him. However, the wind wolf had lost one of its legs, so its movements were not as nimble and fast as before. Puff! Gray and wind wolf crossed paths, and the moment the blue and white sword passed by each other, it quickly slashed across wind wolf's throat. Dark red blood could be seen flowing out of the wind wolf's throat. Gray turned and looked at the wind wolf whose throat had been slit. He waited for it to fall and die, but in the next moment he was stunned. The wind wolf, whose throat had been slit, did not fall down as he had expected. Instead, it used its 3 legs to turn around in a sorry state and once again pounced towards him. How could this be? Gray's eyes widened as he stared in astonishment at the wind wolf, whose throat had clearly been slit, but who was still charging at him as if nothing had happened. However, he didn't hesitate because of this. The demonic sword that had yet to return to its sheath suddenly slashed out. This time, he used his full strength. Puff! Before the wind wolf could reach him, the magic sword in Gray's hand cut into the wound on the wind wolf's throat. He continued to cut deeper, breaking the neck bone, and finally coming out from the back of the wind wolf's neck. Patter! The wind wolf's head rolled to the ground. This time, the headless wind wolf's body finally went limp. Gray frowned as he looked at the wind wolf's corpse. This wind wolf was very strange. First, he couldn't sense its existence with his infrared perception. Now its throat had been slit, but it seemed to be fine. After some thought, he walked over and touched the wind wolf's body. Cold. After touching it, his eyes couldn't help but narrow. It was cold to the touch, as if he had touched a piece of frozen meat that had been hidden in a cellar for a long time. There wasn't the slightest bit of warmth. Logically speaking, since the wind wolf had just been killed by him, there should still be some warmth on its body. Its body is ice cold, like a corpse that has been dead for a long time. It didn't die even after having its throat slit. Gray frowned. Holding the demonic sword that had yet to return to its sheath, he began to cut open the wind wolf's stomach. He didn't collect the wind wolf's blood because he didn't have a rune pouch. Even if he did, he wouldn't dare to take the wind wolf's blood, which was obviously strange. The wind wolf's chest was cut open, but he didn't see any abnormalities. The wind wolf's abdomen was cut open, but he didn't see any abnormalities. The internal organs were cut open, but Gray didn't find anything strange either. After some thought, Gray walked over to the wind wolf's head that had fallen and quickly chopped at it with his sword. Bang! The wind wolf's head was split open. Not only that, but a deep crack appeared on the ground. Gray looked at the wind wolf's head that had been split in 2. In the next moment, his eyes couldn't help but widen. This is... In the wind wolf's tofu-like white brain, there was something that clearly didn't belong to a wind wolf. As the wind wolf's brain flowed out, this thing also fell out of the wind wolf's brain with a thud. It was a black ball of meat the size of an infant's fist. There were many long, tentacle-like things on its surface, like the roots of a tree. It had been implanted into the wind wolf's brain. The wind wolf might have died a long time ago. The reason it can still move is probably because of this thing. It's controlling the wind wolf's brain. Gray guessed with uncertainty. He guessed that this wind wolf should have been controlled by some blood fiend after its death, using this black ball of meat as a hunting tool, controlling the corpse of a blood fiend to fight for itself. I didn't expect there to be such a blood fiend. This was the first time Gray had heard of such an ability. In all the books that Gray had browsed through, there was no description of such a blood fiend. Rustle, rustle. Suddenly, rustling sounds could be heard from the surrounding forest. Then dong! A huge black tiger-shaped blood fiend suddenly sprang out and appeared in Gray's line of sight. This wasn't the end. After this black tiger-shaped blood fiend, a tall two-legged blood fiend and a blood fiend covered in arrow-like thorns also sprang out from the forest. They were all filled with murderous intent as they pounced in Gray's direction. The three types of blood fiends that were supposed to fight each other when they met actually didn't fight each other. Instead, they immediately surrounded Gray. Whoosh! Without any hesitation, Gray increased his speed to the maximum. He leaped across the small stream that was only 2 to 3 meters wide and dashed into the forest on the other side of the stream without hesitation. His infrared perception couldn't detect these 3 blood fiends either. If he wasn't mistaken, these 3 blood fiends should have been killed and controlled by some other blood fiend, just like the Windwolf. Although he was rather confident in his ability to combine the strengths of 3 types of blood fiends, he wasn't so arrogant as to think that he could face the siege of 3 blood fiends. Therefore, he chose to escape without hesitation. After entering the forest, Gray sprinted through the forest at high speed. Rustle, rustle. Behind him, there was a huge commotion. There was no doubt that the 3 blood fiends were chasing after him. Whoosh! Relying on the wind wolf's speed, Gray widened the distance between him and the 3 blood fiends. Finally, he escaped from their line of sight. Then, without hesitation, he came to the shadow of a tree that was so wide that it would take several people to wrap their arms around it and use the shadow ability of the blood fiends. His body was shrouded in a black shadow. Then his entire body merged with the shadow of the tree and became one with it. Just as he finished doing all this, the 3 blood fiends rushed over at lightning speed. They swept past the giant tree and ran forward. He continued to hide in the shadows, not moving an inch. Not long after, the 3 blood fiends, who had lost their target, turned back and looked around in confusion. However, they couldn't find Gray hiding in the shadows. In the end, they could only leave. At this point, Gray raised his eyebrows and walked out of the shadow of the tree. He looked in the direction that the 3 blood fiends had left in with lingering fear. Fortunately, he had run quickly. Otherwise, he would have been in real danger if he had been surrounded by the 3 blood fiends. The ability to control the corpses of the blood fiends, Gray closed his eyes. He was a little tempted by the ability of the blood fiends that could control the corpses of the blood fiends. This ability was really too powerful. If he could obtain the blood of this blood fiend and obtain the ability of this blood fiend, wouldn't it mean that he could also have an army of blood fiends? Imagine if you were facing an enemy and you just waved your hand and dozens of blood fiends suddenly pounced out. The enemy would probably be frightened to the point of collapse. Should I follow it? However, it would be extremely difficult to kill this blood fiend and obtain its blood. Since it could control the blood fiends, there would definitely be many blood fiends around it. Once he attacked this blood fiend, he would definitely be surrounded and attacked by these blood fiends. Although he had the shadow ability and had the opportunity to sneak up to this blood fiend and attack it, he was confident that he would not be able to kill it in one hit. However, he did not dare to guarantee that he would be able to kill them in one strike. If he could not kill them in one strike, what awaited him would be the siege of a large number of blood fiends. Moreover, even if I could kill it in one hit, what if the corpses of the blood fiends could still move after this blood fiend's death? Under normal circumstances, if the blood fiend controlling the corpses of the blood fiends died, the corpses of the blood fiends should not be able to move normally. However, it was better to be safe than sorry. After all, he had never encountered this type of blood fiend before and did not have the slightest understanding of it. Most importantly, he only had one life and could not afford to make any mistakes. After thinking for a while, Gray finally decided to follow and take a look. Chapter 164. Beside the stream. A cicadere looked around cautiously before taking a few steps forward. It slowly approached the stream and lowered its head to lick the water. Rustle, rustle. At this moment, a pitch-black tiger-shaped blood fiend abruptly darted out and appeared beside the spotted deer in a single leap. Because of its huge weight, the ground beside the stream seemed to tremble slightly in an instant. The cicadere wanted to flee in fear when a huge creature suddenly appeared beside it. However, the pitch-black tiger-shaped blood fiend stretched out its front paw and slapped down like an iron hammer. Crack! The cicadere's head was bent at an abnormal angle from the slap. Its body rolled a few times and fell beside the stream. The black tiger lowered its head, picked it up, and headed in a certain direction. Not long after it left, a figure appeared from the shadow of a tree and quickly followed it. This person was Gray. He guessed that the black tiger was hunting for the blood fiend that could control the blood fiend's corpses. Therefore, as long as he followed the black tiger, he should be able to find the blood fiend that could control the blood fiend's corpses. Following behind the giant black tiger, they passed through the dense forest and walked for about 10 minutes. Suddenly, Gray flashed and hid in the shadow of a tree. The moment he hid in the shadow, a yellow-haired blood fiend suddenly appeared. This blood fiend's limbs were slender and strong. It had sharp teeth protruding from its lips and a sharp horn on its head. Just from its appearance, one could feel that this blood fiend was not to be trifled with. It walked towards the tree Gray was hiding in and got closer and closer to Gray. Gray's hand was on the hilt of his sword as he watched the blood fiend nervously. If the blood fiend made any strange movements, he would immediately take action and attack it first. Finally, the blood fiend was close to Gray, less than 3 meters away. Gray held his breath, afraid that the blood fiend would hear his breathing. Fortunately, the blood fiend did not notice him and walked past the tree he was hiding in with its back facing him. He considered whether or not to launch a sneak attack. From this angle, he was confident that he could hit the opponent's vital points before the opponent could react. However, in the end, he restrained himself. He did not want to alert the enemy. Gray only walked out of the shadow of the tree when the yellow-haired blood fiend could no longer be seen. He wanted to look for the black tiger, but he found that the black tiger was nowhere to be found. However, he didn't think much of it and continued to lurk in the direction where he last saw the giant black tiger. According to his estimation, he should be very close to where the blood fiend was. This was because the yellow-furred blood fiend that had just passed by was also a blood fiend that couldn't be detected by infrared perception. In other words, it was also a blood fiend's corpse. Since he was able to encounter other blood fiend corpses that were being manipulated, the blood fiend's nest should not be far away. Sure enough, after a few minutes, he found his target. 8 blood fiends were lazily lying in an open space in a forest that was overgrown with weeds. They were enjoying the not-so-hot autumn sunshine. Among them was a tiger-shaped blood fiend with black fur all over its body. There were also blood fiends with purple spots all over their bodies. There was also a blood fiend covered in yellow scales. From afar, it looked like a huge rock. Gray's gaze immediately fell on a blood fiend that was surrounded by the other blood fiends. This was an ape-shaped blood fiend with a height of more than 2 meters. It was obviously smaller than the steel-armed ape that Gray had hunted before. In addition, the fur on its body was not black. Instead, it was white without any pigmentation. It looked like the fur on a moldy corpse. It was deathly white. The reason why Gray had noticed it immediately was because this blood fiend was currently feasting, and what it was eating was the cicadere that the black tiger-shaped blood fiend had just taken away. It's alive, although it looked more like a corpse than the other blood fiends. When Gray's infrared perception probed the other party, he was surprised to find that the other party could be detected by his infrared perception. Obviously, this was a living blood fiend. This blood fiend should be the one that has the ability to control corpses. Gray had already checked the other 7 blood fiends. They were merely corpses. Obviously, the one that had the ability to control corpses should be this ape-shaped blood fiend. There are actually 7 blood fiends protecting it. Should I make a move? Looking at the ape-shaped blood fiend, Gray frowned. The ability to control corpses was undeniably powerful. If he could get his hands on it, his strength would definitely increase greatly. However, it was also very risky. It was extremely difficult to assassinate a blood fiend while it was under the protection of 7 blood fiends. If he failed and the other blood fiends were still able to move after he killed it, he would be in danger. Let's try it once. If it doesn't work, I'll escape immediately. In the end, Gray decided to give it a try. He had the shadow ability. If it was nighttime, even if there were many blood fiends protecting it, it was entirely possible for him to sneak up on this blood fiend. Moreover, even if he failed, he was very confident that he could escape. After all, the night was his home ground with his shadow ability. The entire forest was pitch black. As long as he hid somewhere, the other blood fiends would not be able to find him, unless there was a blood fiend that could see through the shadow ability. However, there should not be such a blood fiend. Otherwise, he would not have been able to sneak up to this place safely. A few hours later, night fell. The moonlight sprinkled down, but it was blocked by the dense branches and could not penetrate into the forest. The forest was dark, as if it was covered by a huge black cloth. This is the only time. If it fails, retreat immediately. Under the shadow of a tree, Gray's figure stood up quietly as he thought to himself. He looked at the empty space in the forest. The ape-shaped blood fiend with white fur was sleeping there. Around it, the 7 blood fiends from before were surrounding it, vaguely protecting it. Gray did not make the slightest sound. He slowly approached the blood fiend, getting closer and closer to it. 50 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters. Patter. At this moment, one of the blood fiends suddenly stood up and sniffed with its nose. It seemed to have discovered something, but was not sure. I can't go any closer. Gray knew that the scent on his body must have attracted the blood fiend's attention. Although his shadow ability could hide his body and allow him to blend into the shadows, it could not hide his scent. It seems that I have to make my move here. Taking a deep breath, Gray began to secretly mobilize the blood force in his body. The next moment, he used the blood fiend ability, Ice Wind Blade. In the calm forest, a sudden gust of wind whistled. Then, a slightly sparkling green wind blade appeared and quickly slashed at the sleeping ape-shaped blood fiend. Swish! The distance of 20 meters was too short. The ape-shaped blood fiend, which had sensed the movement, merely raised its head. The wind blade was already nearing. Puff! The wind blade easily split open the ape-shaped blood fiend's chest and deeply embedded into its body, leaving a huge wound. At the same time, an icy force suddenly spread out from the wound. The ape-shaped blood fiend's body was rapidly freezing. Roar! The injured ape-shaped blood fiend roared and gave the order to attack. Although it could not see Gray, all the blood fiends jumped up and pounced in the direction of the wind blade. Oh no, I didn't kill it. Without hesitation, Gray turned and ran. He used the Wind Wolf's speed to the maximum. Since he had already made his move and failed to kill the other party, he could only give up. Although the ability to control the blood fiend's corpses was good, it was not worth risking his life for. Patter! However, after running for a few dozen meters, he suddenly heard a series of heavy objects falling to the ground behind him. Chapter 165. Seeing this scene, Gray, who had given up, hesitated for a moment before turning around and slowly approaching the blood beasts. He was on his guard. Once these blood fiends showed signs of coming to life, he was ready to escape immediately. However, even as he approached, these blood fiends still showed no signs of getting up to attack. He even kicked them, but there was still no response. These blood fiends, which were originally corpses, seemed to have completely turned into corpses this time. Having guessed this, he stepped over these blood fiends and arrived at the clearing in the forest. In the clearing, he saw that the ape-type blood fiend had already turned into an ice sculpture. It cannot be any more dead. The wind blades at the beginning probably did not kill it, so it was able to send an attack signal to the blood fiends under its control. The reason why it died in the end was probably because the ice had spread all over its body. Looking at the corpse of the ape-type blood fiend, Gray speculated in his heart. After breaking open the ice and letting it melt, Gray filled an empty kettle with the blood of the ape-type blood fiend. I didn't bring a rune pouch. Looking at the blood flowing out of the ape-type blood fiend, Gray could only shake his head helplessly. His target this time was the remains, and he did not intend to hunt blood fiends. His original plan was to avoid blood fiends as much as possible. Therefore, he only brought wilderness survival equipment and did not bring a rune pouch. After putting away the kettle filled with the blood of the ape-type blood fiend, Gray could not help but look at the 7 blood fiends lying on the ground not far away. His heart was filled with pity. It's a pity that it has been less than 2 months since I last consumed the blood of a blood fiend. Otherwise, if I consumed the blood of this ape-type blood fiend now and obtained its ability to control corpses, I could immediately obtain an army of blood fiends. According to his observation during the day, including the wind wolf he killed, there should be a total of 9 blood fiends under the control of the ape-type blood fiend. In addition to the 7 corpses in front of him, there was also a yellow-haired blood fiend. It should be lurking by the stream, hunting for the ape-type blood fiend. In other words, if he obtained the ability to control corpses now, together with the corpse of the ape-type blood fiend, he would immediately have 9 blood fiends. One could imagine how much stronger his combat strength would be after obtaining 9 blood fiends. No, maybe it's not impossible. Gray suddenly thought of something. According to his estimation, there could be 2 reasons why he couldn't continuously consume blood fiend's blood. On one hand, it was the time interval between 2 swallows. On the other hand, it was the body's tolerance. He felt that the most likely factor was the body's tolerance. Indeed, it had only been less than 2 months since the last time he swallowed the Gale Wolf's blood and obtained a transformation. However, his strength had increased from an upper-level blood warrior to a ferocious blood warrior. The increase in his physical fitness had far surpassed that of a lower-level blood warrior to a middle-level blood warrior or middle-level blood warrior to an upper-level blood warrior. It had been nearly 2 months since his physical body had been strengthened by such a large margin. He felt that swallowing the blood of an ape-type blood fiend wouldn't affect his body too much. At most, his body would become extremely fatigued. Gulp! After figuring this out, Gray swallowed a mouthful of blood at the ape blood fiend's wound, which was still bleeding. He didn't look for another safe location. If there was one, it would be the safest place at the moment. As a blood fiend that controlled 9 blood fiends, it was certain that the ape blood fiend's territory was extremely wide. Now that the ape blood fiend had just died, the other blood fiends wouldn't come here for a short period of time. Therefore, this was the safest place. Whoosh! As soon as he swallowed the blood of the ape blood fiend, a scalding heat appeared in Gray's stomach and spread to his entire body. Gray felt as if he was being roasted over a fire. Sweat kept dripping down his body. In just a short while, his entire body was drenched. His head was dizzy, and his entire body was crimson. He was like a seriously ill patient who had high fever. He had lost all sense of time and his surroundings. If a blood fiend were to attack him at this moment, he wouldn't even have the strength to retaliate. Fortunately, such a thing didn't happen. Just as he had expected, the lair of the ape blood fiend was the safest place at the moment. After an unknown amount of time, his mind finally cleared up. However, what followed was extreme fatigue. Not only was it physical, but it was also mental. He was so tired that it was as if he hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights. Just like that, he fell into a deep sleep. The moment he fell asleep, he came to a conclusion. It's the same as when I consumed Hanhu's blood. It's a little too much. His strength had indeed increased significantly from an upper-level blood warrior to a ferocious blood warrior. However, it was still a little too much for him to consume 2 blood fiends' blood consecutively within a short period of time. In the morning, the sun shone on Gray's face. His eyelids moved heavily, and he finally opened them. His body still felt very tired. He struggled to sit up. Goo! A strange sound was heard. It was his stomach protesting. Yesterday, in order to hunt the ape blood fiend, he had been hiding in the shadows. Naturally, he hadn't eaten anything during the process. In addition, during the transformation process after consuming the ape blood fiend, his body would have consumed a large amount of nutrients. It was normal for his stomach to protest. Gray took out his rations and wolfed them down with water. He only stopped when his rations had decreased by a lot. Fortunately, he was strong enough to carry a lot of rations. Otherwise, with his appetite, he would have had to hunt for food. Then, he stood up and looked at the corpse of the ape blood fiend. In order to obtain the ability to control corpses, he had suffered a lot. Now it was time to test his gains. Staring at the ape blood fiend's corpse, he imagined controlling it. Then, a strange scene appeared. The palm of his left hand was slightly itchy. He looked sideways and saw that on the palm of his left hand, a crack had suddenly appeared. But unexpectedly, no blood flowed out from it. The crack slowly opened up like a slowly opening mouth. At the same time, he could vaguely see a black meatball-like object covered in tentacles within the crack. Finally, the crack opened up to its maximum size. This round object fell from Gray's palm and fell to the ground. After landing on the ground, the numerous tentacles on the meatball-like creature wriggled like earthworms. They dragged the meatball-like creature up the body of the blood fiend and crawled into the mouth of the blood fiend. Then, the body of the ape blood fiend, which was already dead, began to change. It trembled slightly from time to time, as if it had a nervous reaction. Clang! More than 10 minutes later, the tremors on the ape blood fiend's body disappeared. Then, the ape blood fiend opened its eyes and got up. The wound on its chest was still hideous, but it didn't seem to have any effect on it. At this moment, Gray felt that he had established some kind of connection with the ape blood fiend. He only needed to issue a command to the ape blood fiend in his mind, and the ape blood fiend would act according to his orders. Take 5 steps forward. He issued such an order in his mind. Then, the ape blood fiend lifted its legs and walked forward. It took exactly 5 steps. Squat down. Crawl forward. It was as if he was playing with a remote-controlled toy from his previous life. After manipulating the ape blood fiend for a while, Gray had a general understanding of the ability to control corpses that he had obtained from the ape blood fiend, as well as the blood fiends under its control. The blood fiends under my control don't have self-consciousness, but they have some simple abilities to carry out my orders. Gray discovered that the blood fiends under his control had the ability to carry out his relatively simple orders. For example, if Gray ordered the ape blood fiend to move the yellow-haired blood fiend to the stream, the ape blood fiend would find the yellow-haired blood fiend and move it to the stream. During the entire process, Gray didn't need to issue any other orders. Moreover, the black meatball-like object can secrete a substance that prevents the corpse from decaying, so that the corpse won't lose its combat ability. The only pity is that the blood fiends under my control will lose all their abilities except for their physical abilities. But this is normal, since the blood fiends are already dead. Even if the blood fiends were to use wind blades and flames, they still required the support of the power of blood. Since the blood fiends were already dead, their bodies naturally couldn't produce the power of blood. Therefore, the blood fiends under my control would lose the ability to use wind blades and flames and would only retain their physical abilities. Even so, it's still an extremely powerful ability. With so many blood fiends under my control, I can defeat most of the blood fiends with just my physical abilities. If there are enough blood fiends, it's not impossible for me to fight above my level. Gray wasn't disappointed that the blood fiends under his control couldn't use their abilities. He went to the corpses of the 7 blood fiends and used the same method to control them. Then, he went to the stream, found the yellow-haired blood fiend, and controlled it as well. After taking a bath in the stream and changing into a new set of clothes, Gray set off to search for the ruins with 9 blood fiends in tow. One day later, in the morning. We should be there in half a day, Gray judged as he looked at the map in his hand. Gray kept the map and walked forward. After walking for about an hour, Gray suddenly stopped and looked down at the thing under his feet. It was a pile of black ashes, and there was some firewood beside it that hadn't finished burning. Someone camped here, and it should have been done in the past few days. Judging from the age of the ashes, this pile of ashes should have been left here in the past few days. If it had been left here for too long, it would have been covered by soil due to wind and rain. However, this pile of ashes was still in the same state as when it was burning. Therefore, Gray judged that this pile of ashes should have been left here in the past few days. Who exactly left this behind? Suddenly, Gray's expression changed as he thought of a possibility. This place isn't far from the ruins. Could it be that the person is heading there? He was at most 1 or 2 hours away from the ruins. At such a close distance, it was entirely possible that the person was heading there for the ruins. Moreover, even if the person wasn't heading there for the ruins, it wasn't impossible for them to bump into the ruins by chance. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but speed up. He couldn't let someone else get to the ruins first. Otherwise, the half a month's time from Sydney Hill to Oka Hill would have been wasted. After more than an hour, Gray was extremely close to the ruins. Roar! Suddenly, an angry roar of a blood fiend was heard. There was extreme anger in the sound, as if it had been provoked. The direction of the sound was in the direction of the ruins. Chapter 166. Ong. To prevent the blood fiend from causing too much of a commotion, Gray ordered the blood fiend to stay where it was while he sneaked over alone. After advancing cautiously for a while, Gray saw the ruins of a building through the gaps in the leaves. Collapsed walls, collapsed houses, and a building with a detached roof. It was a ruin of a building. Amidst the ruins, he saw the roaring blood fiend. It was a blood fiend with black fur all over its body. Its body was 3 meters long, and its joints were thick. Its eyes were as big as a baby's fist. On both sides of its head, there was a curved horn that was as sharp as a machete. At this moment, the blood fiend was being attacked by 4 people. There were many wounds on its body, and bright red blood was dripping everywhere. If nothing went wrong, the blood fiend would be killed by the combined forces of the 4 people. It's them. Gray's eyes widened in astonishment when he saw the 4 of them working together to kill the blood fiend. These 4 people were the purple-haired girl, Sophia, and the rest who had traveled with him. How did they get here? How did they know about these ruins? Could it be that they secretly looked through my things? Gray was on high alert. His first thought was that the other party had secretly looked through his things and found the map of the ruins. That was why they were here. No, that's not right. I have always carried the map of the ruins with me. They couldn't have stolen it from me. But soon Gray shook his head. It was necessary to be vigilant when outside. Hence, Gray always carried his money and the map with him. Even when he was bathing, they never left his sight. He did not think that the other party had the ability to sneak a peek at the map of the ruins without him noticing. Could it be a coincidence? But this is too much of a coincidence. Is this really a coincidence? However, Gray didn't quite believe that this was a coincidence. When he was in Fergus City, he coincidentally came to Oka City with the same caravan. Now, he coincidentally came to the same ruins. Could this really be explained by coincidence? Bang! Just as Gray was thinking about this, the battle between the 4 of them and the blood fiend had come to an end. With its neck pierced, the blood beast struggled for a moment before collapsing to the ground. It smashed into the ground of the ruins, causing the ground to tremble slightly. I didn't expect this blood fiend to be hiding in the ruins. If Miss hadn't discovered it, I'm afraid we would have been ambushed by it. The woman in the orange battle suit said as she took out a rune bag to collect the blood. I wonder if anyone has visited this ruin before. The woman in the red battle suit looked into the ruins. The purple-haired girl Sophia was about to speak when she suddenly frowned. She looked at the tree where Gray was hiding. Something's hiding there. Pung. As soon as she finished speaking, the brown-bearded man, Teresa, already understood. He stepped on the ground, and his body shot out like a cannonball. He suddenly appeared beside the tree and chopped at the tree with his axe. He intended to chop down the tree and Gray, who was hiding behind it. The shadow ability actually failed. Gray was surprised and immediately jumped out of the shadows. He quickly unsheathed his sword and slashed at the incoming axe. Clang! The axe and sword collided. Then, Gray suddenly felt a huge force coming from the sword, and his whole body involuntarily retreated. He didn't know what kind of blood art the brown-bearded man, Teresa, had cultivated, but his strength was actually stronger than his frost tiger's. It's you, Sophia, and the other 2 quickly ran over. When they saw that the person hiding was Gray, the woman in the red battle suit couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Then, she immediately said with an unfriendly expression, "You followed us. Kid, why are you here?" The brown-bearded man, Teresa, who forced Gray back with his axe, also had a murderous look on his face. "That's what I wanted to say." Holding the magic sword, Gray looked at the four of them calmly. Although there were four of them, he wasn't afraid at all. After all, the 9 blood fiends were nearby and would arrive in a moment. "For this ruin, I specially came from Sydney to Oka territory. What's the matter with you guys? Why are you here? You want to say that this is just an accident? Do you think we'll believe you?" The woman in the orange battle suit snorted coldly. Gray frowned slightly. After thinking for a while, he took out the map of the ruin and threw it to the woman in the orange battle suit. "This is a map of the ruin that I got from a crack in a book." The woman in the orange battle suit reached out and took a closer look. The next moment, her face was filled with surprise. "It's really a map of the ruin." She didn't think that the map was fake because the ink on the map was obviously left a long time ago. How can there be such a coincidence? The brown-bearded man, Teresa, looked at the map while on guard against Gray. His face was also filled with surprise. "Really? Young lady, look." The woman in the orange battle suit handed the map to the purple-haired girl, Sophia. The purple-haired girl took the map and frowned after looking at it. "You said that you got this map from a book. Who wrote this book?" "I think it's someone called Joseph. I can't remember his full name." Gray thought for a while and recalled that he had gotten this map for a long time. He couldn't remember the author's name. "Young lady, it really is a coincidence." Hearing Gray say the name, the woman in the red battle suit was astonished. "Could you please explain? Where did you get the location of this ruin?" With confidence, Gray didn't show the slightest fear, even in the face of 4 people. "We bought the location of this ruin from a man called Justin Johnson in the Sydney Marquis territory. According to him, this ruin was discovered by his grandfather, Joseph Johnson." The purple-haired girl, Sophia, said, "Joseph Johnson?" Hearing this name, Gray couldn't help but remember that the author of the book was indeed called Joseph Johnson. He only had a map and didn't bring the book. If they had secretly looked at his map while he was asleep, they shouldn't have known this name. It really is a coincidence. However, it was hard for him to believe that it was a coincidence. After all, it was too much of a coincidence. "Although I'm also very surprised by this coincidence. Since we've met, why don't we explore this ruin together? What do you think?" The purple-haired girl, Sophia, looked at Gray and said with a smile. "Okay." Gray also said with a smile. From the purple-haired girl, Sophia's tone, he could tell that she was being forceful. Obviously, if he didn't agree, in order to prevent any accidents from happening, or if Gray found helpers to kill them on the way back, the other party would use some methods to force him to stay. However, he didn't mind. In fact, this was exactly what he wanted. The ruin was right in front of him, so he naturally couldn't just leave. As for the threat brought by these 4 people, he had 9 blood fiends, so he wasn't afraid. If it wasn't for the fact that he was worried about the power behind these 4 people and that the blood fiends couldn't use their abilities and weren't as strong as normal blood fiends, he wouldn't have minded taking the ruin for himself. "Ha! Young master, welcome to work together again." Putting away the battle axe, the brown-bearded man, Teresa, chuckled. "Yes, I didn't expect to have a chance to work together again." Gray also had a smile on his face. The first time they worked together was when they were dealing with the spirit. Therefore, exploring the ruin together was their second time working together. However, he had a strange feeling in his heart. He felt that this coincidence was too strange, as if it was arranged by someone. Chapter 167. Collapsed stone pillars, dilapidated walls, broken buildings, the ruins were in ruins, and there was not a single intact building. The purple-haired girl, Sophia, and the other 3, including Gray, made a total of 5 people standing in the middle of the ruins. They couldn't help but frown slightly. The ruins were too badly damaged, and many houses had collapsed. If they wanted to search, they had to remove all the heavy objects on top of them. Rumble. A collapsed wall that weighed several tons was lifted up by Gray, revealing the thing underneath, allowing it to see the light of day again. rotten wooden cabinets, dilapidated murals, and rusty metal decorations. Pulling out the magic sword his waist, he pried open the rotten wooden cabinets, revealing all kinds of rotten and broken things. Shaking his head, Gray left and walked to other places. Rumble. Another wall that weighed several tons was lifted up by Gray, and it was overturned, raising a lot of yellow dust. Gray dodged and waited until the yellow dust disappeared before he walked up to check it out. A moment later, he turned and left. "Miss, what do you think this is?" The woman in red seemed to have found something. Gray turned his head to look. She was holding a basin-shaped metal object in her hand. The basin-shaped metal object was hollow inside, and the top was a metal net. It was full of rust, but many runes could be seen. Sophia looked at the basin-shaped metal object for a moment and said, "This should be a furnace used for heating during the Empire. It doesn't have much value." Hearing this, the woman in red had to throw it away. If it was a small object, she could keep it, but such a big object was not convenient to carry, so she could only give it up. Rumble. A severely deformed door was kicked open by Gray, and a room that hadn't collapsed yet appeared in front of Gray's eyes. In the room, there was a bed and a few cabinets. This should be a bedroom. Because the entire space was isolated from the outside world, the things in the room were still intact. Gray walked in and rummaged. An upright cabinet was opened. Inside were clothes with traces of decay. With a gentle touch of his hand, the clothes fell to the ground like dust on the wall. Gray opened a short cabinet, and there were a few pairs of leather shoes, which were also quite decayed. One cabinet after another was opened. Most of the things inside were daily necessities from that era, but they were all decayed beyond recognition. It would be strange if ordinary things could be preserved after 1,000 years. A small drawer was pulled open, and a book appeared in front of Gray. Gray didn't pay too much attention to it, as he stretched out his finger to touch the book. He had encountered many books before, but all of them broke at the touch without exception. The feeling in his hand made Gray's eyes lit up slightly. The book that he touched did not suddenly scatter like ashes like the books he had seen before. Instead, it gave Gray a feeling of elasticity. He reached out his hand and slowly picked up the book, studying it carefully. This was a book made entirely of leather. The cover and pages were all made of leather. Not only that, the leather should have been specially treated. The books he had encountered before also had leather covers, but they were also decayed. Obviously, without special treatment, even leather could not be preserved for more than 1,000 years. Herculean Bull. Gray flipped the book over and saw the name of the book. Judging from the name, this should be a blood spell book. He flipped open the book, and his guess was confirmed. This was indeed a blood spell book, and it was a blood spell book with 3 sequences. In other words, through this blood spell book, he could directly cultivate to the barbarian level. I can give it a try. Although it was not the Wind Wolf sequence blood spell book that Gray wanted the most, it was still a blood spell that could be cultivated to the barbarian level. If he still couldn't obtain the barbarian level Wind Wolf sequence blood technique after reaching the Blood Berserker Warrior level, he could give it a try. He could consume the blood of the corresponding blood fiend recorded in this book and cultivate the barbarian level blood technique. Gray put the book away and flipped through it again. After finding nothing, he left the room. "Not bad, huh?" Seeing Gray walk out, the brown-bearded man, Teresa, seemed to be referring to something. Although they were all rummaging through the ruins, they obviously did not stop monitoring Gray. The scene of Gray finding the blood spell book should have been seen by them. "Not bad." Gray looked at the brown-bearded man, Teresa, and replied indifferently. The brown-bearded man, Teresa, obviously thought that with the strength of the 4 of them, they would be able to kill him. However, the truth was not so. With 9 blood fiends, he was not afraid of them at all. The brown-bearded man, was slightly dissatisfied with Gray's uncooperative attitude and said, "Looking at the thickness, there should be 3 sequences, right? A blood spell book with 3 sequences. Even the cheapest one would cost at least 100,000 gold coins. This is not just okay." "Really? So it's that valuable?" Gray's expression did not change, and he pretended to be surprised. The brown-bearded man's expression suddenly turned cold, and his gaze locked onto Gray. At the same time, Gray's expression also turned cold, and he also looked at the other party coldly. For a moment, the atmosphere became a little strange. At this moment, the purple-haired girl, Sophia, opened her mouth and said, "I wonder what sequence of blood fiends it is. If it's a sequence of blood fiends that we don't have, we can exchange it with blood spell books of other sequences and make a copy of each other." Following the other party's words, the atmosphere was broken. The brown, bearded man, Teresa, withdrew his gaze from Gray, and Gray's cold gaze was no longer as conspicuous. If the other party could exchange it with other blood spell books, he would naturally agree. After all, if he exchanged it with the other party, it would be equivalent to him obtaining 2 blood spell books, and his gains would be greater. It was the same for the other party. Using a blood spell book that he already had as the price to obtain a blood spell book that he did not have, he would also gain something. This should be a win-win situation. The Herculean Bull series can be cultivated to the barbarian level. Gray said, "Herculean Bull? This is indeed a sequence of blood fiends that we don't have. We are willing to exchange the first 3 sequences of blood spell books of other sequences with you." The purple-haired girl, Sophia, said, "Which sequence blood spell books do you have?" Gray asked. "The arrow, porcupine boar, knife mantis, wind wolf, venomous bee, and tide turtle." The purple-haired girl, Sophia, said, "The wind wolf sequence." Gray's expression did not change, but he could not help but feel delighted. The other party actually had the wind wolf sequence blood spell that he wanted the most. This was really a pleasant surprise. "I choose the wind wolf sequence," he said with a calm expression. "Okay, after exploring the ruins, we can make a copy of each other's blood spell books." The purple-haired girl, Sophia, nodded. After the discussion, the 5 of them continued to explore the ruins. A few hours later, they explored from the front of the ruins to the back of the ruins. During this period, Gray, the purple-haired girl, Sophia, and the other 3 had some gains. They each obtained 1 or 2 rune items. Gray obtained a brooch-shaped rune item. After Sophia's appraisal, it was confirmed that this rune item had the function of a raincoat after it was activated. Bang, bang, bang. The brown-bearded man walked forward while knocking on the collapsed walls. In front of one of the collapsed walls, a smile suddenly appeared on his face as he looked at Gray. "Young master, come give me a hand." Seeing that the other party was calling out to him, Gray raised his eyebrows, but he still walked over. At this time, the other party was standing in front of a collapsed wall that was more than 4 meters wide and nearly 10 meters long. It was probably more than 10 tons in weight. "You lift the other side, and we'll work together to lift it up." Seeing Gray walk over, the brown-bearded man, Teresa, who had already grabbed a corner of the wall, said. Gray nodded, walked to the other side of the wall, grabbed the other corner, and began to exert force with the brown-bearded man. With the 2 of them exerting force, the stone that was more than 10 tons in weight first trembled, then slowly rose up. Kaboom! With a loud noise, the wall was completely overturned. A large amount of dust rose up several meters high. Gray and the brown-bearded man could not help but step back to avoid the dust. After a while, after the dust had settled, the 2 of them looked at the place that was previously covered by the wall. A secret room? When he saw it, Gray could not help but reveal a slight surprise in his eyes. However, in his line of sight, there was a 2-meter-long and wide place with a staircase that led downwards. Obviously, this was a staircase that led downwards. According to the style of this world's nobles, if there are no surprises, this should be the secret room of this castle. Seeing this entrance, the brown-bearded man, Teresa, was also delighted and said to Sophia, "Miss, we found the secret room." Sophia, the woman in red, and the woman in orange immediately walked over. Their gazes couldn't help but look towards the entrance. Chapter 168. On the side of the wall at the entrance of a secret chamber, there was a place that seemed to be controlled by a rune lamp. The purple-haired girl, Sophia, stepped forward and released a trace of blood energy, but no light appeared. She looked back at the girl in the orange battle suit. "Julie, see if you can fix it." Yes, Mississippi, the girl called Julie, who was also the girl in the orange battle suit, nodded, and walked forward. She fiddled with it a few times, and light immediately came out of the secret chamber. Runemaster. Gray could not help but look at the girl in the orange battle suit in surprise. He did not expect this girl to be a runemaster. Following the stairs, the five of them walked down. After walking for about a few dozen meters, a tunnel with yellow stone walls on both sides and stone slabs on the ground appeared in front of them. The five of them walked forward, and every step they took was very careful. In such a large imperial ruin, it was inevitable that there would be rune mechanisms in the secret chamber. However, they did not know whether these mechanisms had been damaged after such a long time, just like the rune lamp before. Swish, swish, swish. After moving forward for more than 20 meters, suddenly, a mechanical clacking sound was heard. Then, right above the five of them, and even in front of and behind the tunnel, several holes suddenly appeared. From the holes, sharp blades flashing with cold light suddenly sped out and shot toward the five of them. The five of them immediately noticed. Ding, ding, ding. The wind wolf's speed was pushed to the limit by Gray. Gray was like a gust of wind as he sped through the tunnel. Several sharp blades flashing with cold light were suddenly swept away by a blue and white longsword when they were about to hit him. The purple-haired girl Sophia and the other three also used their own methods. The purple-haired girl also rushed forward quickly, and her speed was not inferior to Gray's at all. The girl in the red battle suit held two short knives in her hands. She waved them so tightly that not a single blade could get close to her body. The girl in the orange battle suit, Julie, was extremely agile. With a slight twist of her body, she dodged the sharp blades that were shot at her. The brown-bearded man used the battle axe in his hand as a fan. Every time he slapped, a large number of sharp blades that were shot at him were sent flying. After passing through the range of the sharp blades, a door appeared on the right side of the wall in front of him. Gray entered it without hesitation. This was a small room that was only a few dozen square meters in size. In the room, there were dozens of bronze bottles that looked like water bottles. These bronze bottles were all labeled with words. However, due to the passage of time, the words had already become blurry. Gray casually opened one of the bottles. Immediately, a foul smell wafted out, and he couldn't help but put the cork back. It should be where the blood of the blood fiends are stored. After such a long time, the blood of the blood fiends should have rotted away. The moment Gray arrived, the purple-haired girl, Sophia, arrived as well. However, she did not approach him like Gray. Looking at Gray, who was suffocated by the stench, she explained with a calm expression, but there was a trace of unconcealable schadenfreude in her eyes. After leaving the room, the five of them continued down the tunnel. The tunnel was not a straight line. Instead, it had a slight curve. After walking for another few dozen meters, the five of them arrived at a room without triggering any mechanism. They did not know if there were no more mechanisms or if the mechanism had been damaged. In the room, there were a total of 2 cabinets, one on the left and one on the right. Above the cabinets, there were 5 drawers. On each drawer, there were also labels that could not be read clearly. The 5 of them went forward and opened the drawers. They found that there were potion bottles in these drawers. Potions that could be collected by the owner of the ruins were most likely magic potions. Unfortunately, after the 5 of them checked, they found that some of them had dried up, some of them emitted a foul smell, and all of them had lost their effectiveness. The 5 of them did not find anything and continued forward. After walking for a few meters, whoosh, runes suddenly lit up on the walls around the tunnel. Then, fireballs the size of footballs suddenly appeared. Like meteors falling from the sky, they smashed toward the 5 of them with a scorching aura, completely blocking the tunnel in front of and behind them. The 5 of them could not help but become serious. Unlike the mechanism that shot out the sharp blades before, the power of this mechanism was obviously not just a little bit stronger. Puff! Lightning coiled around the magic sword in his hand. Gray slashed again and again, and the fireballs were split into 2 halves. In the end, they turned into sparks and disappeared. The purple-haired girl, Sophia, held a long spear in her hand. Purple light revolved around the tip of the spear. The spear pierced through the fireballs, and with a slight tremble, the fireballs immediately dissipated. The woman in the red battle suit continuously clashed with her two short blades. Then, a white light suddenly shot out, and the fireballs shattered one after another. The woman in orange battle attire held a long black whip. She swung the whip, stirring the fireballs. Then, she pulled the whip back, and the fireballs were immediately crushed. And the brown-bearded man, Teresa, repeatedly chopped with his axe. Every time the axe fell, a fireball would shatter. A moment later, the five of them endured the fireball attacks and passed through this section of the tunnel. Then, a room appeared in front of them. Seeing the things in this room, Gray almost immediately rushed inside. Not only him, Sophia and the other three did the same, because there was an arc-shaped weapon rack in the middle of the room. On the rack, no less than several hundred weapons were displayed, and the most conspicuous ones were the two innermost weapons facing the entrance, a dagger and a spear. These two weapons had their own racks. The other weapons were like stars surrounding the moon, arching around these two weapons. Whoosh! Rushing over, Gray quickly grabbed the dagger. He was not a spear user. On the contrary, a dagger was easy to carry and could be used in many places. Compared to a spear, he wanted to get the dagger more. So, he grabbed the dagger first. Bang! He smoothly grabbed the dagger in his hand. After grabbing it, a trace of astonishment appeared in his eyes. This dagger, together with its scabbard, actually weighed no less than 12 pounds. This dagger was not big, but it actually had this kind of weight. It seemed that the density of the metal used was very high. He didn't have time to size up this dagger. After grabbing the dagger, his other hand quickly grabbed the remaining spear. Although he didn't use a spear, he naturally couldn't let go of a weapon that was very likely to be a magic weapon. But this time, he grabbed empty air. To be more precise, he was blocked. A palm attack directly colliding with his hand grabbing the spear. The one who attacked was the purple-haired girl, Sophia. The other party's speed was not inferior to Gray's. When Gray arrived, she immediately arrived. At the same time, she blocked Gray's hand that was about to grab the spear, and at the same time, her other hand firmly grasped the spear. Seeing that the spear had completely fallen into the purple-haired girl, Sophia's hand, Gray had no choice but to give up. He inserted the dagger into a weapon slot on the leg of the leather armor and began to look for the remaining few hundred weapons. But the results of his search disappointed him. Among these weapons, there were quite a few that were of decent quality. He saw quite a number of 1,000 skills weapons, and even more than a dozen that were very likely to be magic weapons. Unfortunately, these weapons weren't completely preserved. Their surfaces were heavily corroded. Not only were they unable to activate the weapon's attributes, they couldn't even be used as a normal weapon. After looking through all the weapons in the room and confirming that there was nothing useful, Gray walked to a corner of the room, put some distance between himself and the four of them, and took out the dagger that he had just snatched. He was so focused on snatching the weapons that he didn't have time to check the state of the dagger and whether it was corroded. Clang! Pulling it open, a green dagger appeared in front of Gray's eyes. The entire dagger was dark green. It wasn't the green of plants, but a deep, oppressive dark green. A trace of blood energy was poured into the dagger. The dark green on the surface of the dagger became even darker, almost turning into ink. He stabbed the dagger into the wall next to him. It wasn't too sharp to the touch. At most, it was the sharpness of a magic sword without activating the lightning attribute. What attribute is it? He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. The attribute that this dagger possessed didn't seem to be one that could increase the sharpness or power of a weapon. After thinking for a while, he decided to study it slowly in the future. He put the dagger back on the leg of the leather armor and looked at Sophia and the others. Sophia and the others also looked at Gray. Both sides had a tacit understanding and didn't mention anything about the fight just now. They continued to move forward. After walking for a few dozen meters, they reached the end of the tunnel. And in front of them, a room appeared in front of them. But at this moment, something strange happened. Rumble. Chapter 169. Not good. Looking at the two metal walls blocking the front and back of the tunnel, Gray, Sophia, and the other three turned pale. They launched their attacks at the metal wall in front of them. Clang! Gray's magic sword, which was wrapped in lightning, struck the metal wall. The surface of the metal wall flickered with lightning, but when the lightning dissipated, Gray's magic sword only left a shallow scratch on the wall. Clang, clang, clang. The attacks of the purple-haired girl Sophia and the other three were the same. They only left shallow scratches on the metal wall. What a hard metal! Gray's face darkened. With his current strength, coupled with the power of the magic sword, he could even break a steel pillar. But only a shallow scratch was left on the metal wall. It could be seen that the metal used for the metal wall was very strong. Now that even the path behind them had been cut off, there was no way they could retreat even if they wanted to. "Miss, what do we do now?" The purple-haired girl Sophia and the other three's faces also darkened. The girl in red said worriedly, "Try the walls on both sides." The purple-haired girl Sophia frowned and said. The brown-bearded man, Teresa, the girl in red, and the girl in orange hurriedly used their weapons to attack the wall on the side. Gray also tried to attack the wall on the side. Poof! With their attacks, the stone wall was broken, and large pieces of stone fell down. But their faces became more and more unsightly, because after the stone fell, there was also a metal wall behind them. In the end, they tried the walls on both sides, above them, and on the ground. They found that there were also metal walls in all four places. They were completely sealed in this tunnel. "We're trapped to death." Gray frowned. He was thinking about the possibility of summoning the blood beasts into the ruins and destroying this mechanism from outside the tunnel. "Sir Gray." At this moment, the purple-haired girl Sophia walked over from behind Gray and greeted him. Gray turned around and looked at her in confusion. "I have a way to destroy this mechanism, but I'll have to pay a high price." The purple-haired girl Sophia said in response to Gray's gaze. "What do you want?" Gray raised his eyebrows and asked. "I want to pick one item first." The purple-haired girl Sophia narrowed her eyes. Those narrowed eyes were slightly upturned, making her look like a cunning fox. Gray instinctively kept his guard up. He frowned and thought for a moment before he finally said helplessly, "Sure." Although he had thought of summoning the 9 blood beasts into the tunnel and destroying the mechanism from the outside, he wasn't confident that it would work. If the other party really had the ability to destroy this mechanism, it wasn't impossible for him to let the other party choose one item first. After all, if he couldn't destroy this mechanism today, no matter how many items he had, it would be useless. "Then I'll begin." The purple-haired girl Sophia's lips curled. She turned around and walked to the metal wall. She took out a crystal bottle that contained a black liquid. She uncorked the crystal bottle and tilted it slightly, allowing the black liquid to flow out. She then drew a semicircle on the metal wall. Creak, creak. As the black liquid came into contact with the metal wall, a drastic change occurred. The metal wall that came into contact with the black liquid bubbled and quickly melted like ice. Finally, a semicircle appeared. With a light kick, a semicircle large enough for a person to pass through appeared. What a strong corrosive effect. Seeing this scene, Gray was inwardly shocked. He had tested the sturdiness of the metal wall, but such a sturdy metal wall was easily corroded. The corrosive effect of this black liquid was evident. Gray felt that even the aqua regia from his previous life was not as corrosive as this black liquid. Half squatting through the gap, the 5 of them walked into a huge room. In the room, there was a pile of glittering gold coins. The amount was even more than what Gray had found in the imperial ruins in the Red Leaf Forest. In addition, there was a wooden cabinet. Gray came to the wooden cabinet and opened it. His eyes suddenly lit up. There were purple-black things in front of him. They were magic coins, densely packed and piled up in the entire chest. Unlike gold coins, magic coins were extremely valuable in themselves. There was no need to worry about forgery, so there was no mark on it. In other words, this chest of magic coins could be used directly. There are probably more than 10,000. Gray estimated after glancing at the height of the chest. 10,000 magic coins were equivalent to 1 million gold coins. This was undoubtedly a huge fortune. He then looked at the other parts of the room. There was nothing else. Obviously, this room should be where gold coins, magic coins, and other valuables were stored. Sir Gray, according to our agreement, I'll choose first. The purple-haired girl, Sophia, walked over and said with a smile. Hearing her words, Gray's heart suddenly thumped and his expression turned ugly. There were two things in the room, a pile of gold coins and a chest of magic coins. Among them, the most valuable should be the pile of gold coins. Even if sold as gold, it would definitely be worth millions. The second was the magic coins. However, there was a problem. How would he transport the gold coins? Even if he used all 9 blood fiends to transport them, he would not be able to take away much gold coins. So, to be honest, magic coins are the ones that benefited the most after making the choice. If nothing went wrong, the other party would most likely choose the magic coins. As for him, he would be guarding a pile of gold coins that he could not take away. Seeing Gray's ugly expression, the purple-haired girl, Sophia, smiled even more brightly. I choose. Speaking of this, she deliberately paused. This pile of gold coins. Gray could not help but look at her in astonishment. She actually chose the pile of gold coins that she cannot take away? Facing Gray's surprised gaze, the purple-haired girl, Sophia, smiled slightly and walked straight to the pile of gold coins. Whoosh! The next moment, Gray's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. The purple-haired girl, Sophia, walked to the pile of gold coins and took out a leather bag with many golden patterns from her waist. She opened it and approached the pile of gold coins. Then, the pile of gold coins, which was more than the pile of gold coins in the Red Leaf Forest ruins, suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if they had never been there. Rune portal bag. There was no doubt that it could only be a rune portal bag that could make such a large amount of gold coins disappear all of a sudden. Moreover, the size of this rune portal bag was not small, at least more than 10 cubic meters. After all, the pile of gold coins was not small. You actually have a rune portal bag. Gray looked at the purple-haired girl, Sophia, with great surprise in his eyes. The family behind the purple-haired girl, Sophia, was probably more powerful than he had imagined. She even had something like a portal bag. However, among the 3rd Duke and 7th Marquis family of the Purple Moon Kingdom, there is no family with the surname Pendela. It seems that the surname that she gave when she introduced herself earlier was fake. Gray secretly guessed in his heart. After exploring the secret room, the 5 of them continued to explore other places in the ruins, but they did not find anything else. It was close to evening, but the 5 of them did not leave. Instead, they set up a tent in an open space in the ruins and prepared to spend the night there. Then, shall we start copying each other's blood techniques now? The man with the brown beard was patrolling the surroundings, while the woman in red and the woman in orange were preparing dinner. Sophia looked at Gray with a smile on her face. Okay, Gray nodded. He was in a good mood. Although he did not earn as much as the purple-haired girl, he had no choice. With such a pile of gold coins, without a rune portal bag, he would not be able to carry much. Even if he had to choose first, he would definitely choose magic coins. Gray handed over the Herculean bull sequence's blood techniques. Instead, he received 3 small volumes of the Wind Wolf sequence's blood techniques. Picking up the blood technique book, Gray carefully flipped through it. After confirming that it was the Wind Wolf sequence's blood technique book, he started copying the barbarian-level blood technique book with the pen and paper provided by Sophia. A few days later, in the forest near Azure Civ Town, Gray, Sophia, and the other 2 appeared here. Because they had to copy the blood technique book, Gray traveled with them. The 9 blood fiends were under his control, following them from a distance. Chapter 170. Stop! Hand over the green radish grass. Why? We were the ones who picked the green radish grass. Why should we hand it over to you? Because we're from the giant crocodile mercenary group. The 5 of them walked out of the forest. Suddenly, they heard a dispute in front of them. Hearing this, the 5 of them raised their eyebrows, but they didn't stop. Soon, they saw the situation in front of them. More than 10 mercenaries with the giant crocodile mercenary group's emblem on their arms were blocking the exit of the forest. They were stopping all the mercenaries who wanted to leave the Jade Sea Forest and forcing them to hand over the green radish grass that they had picked. Stop! A short mercenary who seemed to be the captain of the giant crocodile mercenary group instinctively berated Gray and the rest. But when he saw what Sophia and the rest were wearing, his voice was cut off halfway, as if someone had suddenly grabbed his neck, and he couldn't make a sound. "What's the matter?" The brown-bearded man, Teresa, snorted and looked at the short mercenary. "No, nothing." To be able to become a captain in the giant crocodile mercenary group, his eyesight was not bad. He could tell at a glance that Sophia and the rest's armor was not ordinary. Although the colors were different, without exception, they were all exquisite armor. He had only seen such exquisite armor on his leader before. Moreover, he faintly felt that even his leader's armor was slightly inferior to the armor on the 4 people in front of him. Without a doubt, people who could wear such armor were not simple people. They were most likely from noble families. Even if they weren't, they were definitely related to the noble families. Although the giant crocodile mercenary group was considered powerful, they definitely weren't willing to become enemies with such people. That was why he stopped halfway through berating them. "Sirs, please." He waved his hand and gestured for the other giant crocodile mercenary group to make way. Then, he politely said to Sophia and the rest. Sophia and the other 3 didn't pay any more attention to him and directly walked out. As for the giant crocodile mercenary group's actions, although they saw it clearly, they obviously didn't intend to stand up for the ordinary mercenaries. As nobles, why would they care about the quarrels between ordinary people? Gray followed behind Sophia's group of 4 and also walked out. He was wearing an ordinary leather armor that couldn't be any more ordinary. Obviously, he didn't look like Sophia's group of 4. Seeing Gray's appearance, a few mercenaries who were watching felt their eyes lit up and quickly followed behind Gray. All of this was naturally seen by the short mercenary of the giant crocodile mercenary group. Hesitation flashed across his face, but he clenched his teeth and hurriedly asked Sophia and the other 3 with a face full of smiles. Sirs, may I ask if they are with you?" The short mercenary group crocodile, Gray and the rest. Crocodile, 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 isle, and crocodile, 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 crocodiles, crocodile, crocodile, crow, crocodile. "No, we're not familiar with them." Then she brought the brown-bearded man and the other 2 and walked straight out, distancing themselves from Gray. "Hand over the usnea grass on you." After receiving Sophia's affirmation, the short mercenary straightened his back and snorted coldly. He led several of the giant crocodile mercenary band's mercenaries to block Gray's path. Looking at the huge group of mercenaries blocking their way, Gray raised his eyebrows. He wasn't angry at Sophia's actions because he really wasn't familiar with them. "Didn't you hear? Hand over the usnea grass on you. You open the box behind you, want to check it." Seeing that Gray didn't do as he wanted, the short mercenary group crocodile shouted angrily and wanted to forcefully take down the wooden box on Gray's back to check. A mercenary walking in the forest carrying a cumbersome wooden box was obviously abnormal. If he guessed correctly, there was a lot of usnea grass in the wooden box. Scram! As the son of a noble, Gray didn't have the habit of using his power to bully others, but that didn't mean that he had to tolerate a few commoners. Even though he was carrying more than 100 kilograms on his back, he wasn't affected much. He kicked out heavily and abruptly kicked the short mercenary group crocodile. Bam! The short mercenary group crocodile flew back heavily and crashed into a tree. He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, and his entire person became dispirited. To be able to become the leader of the giant crocodile mercenary group, his strength was naturally not bad. He had practiced blood techniques, and his strength had reached the level of a middle-level blood warrior. Unfortunately, the person in front of him was someone whose strength could be ranked among the top of the ferocious blood warriors. Damn it, he injured the leader. Seeing that their leader, who was usually brave and fierce, had been sent flying with a kick, the surrounding giant crocodile mercenary group were stunned for a moment, then immediately reacted and drew their weapons, surrounding them. Although their leader had been injured by the other party, it was obvious that the other party had launched a sneak attack. There were more than 10 of them here, so how could they be afraid of the other party? Moreover, as mercenaries, Which one of them didn't live on the edge of a blade? It was normal for them to meet an enemy stronger than them. If they were afraid when they met an enemy stronger than them, then what kind of mercenaries were they? Swish, swish. Two mercenaries, one on the left and one on the right, ruthlessly slashed at Gray with long swords in their hands. Whoosh! In front of them, a mercenary wielding a spear stabbed at Gray's head. The spear in his hand was like a venomous snake. The three of them attacked ruthlessly, wanting to take Gray's life as soon as they made their move. With a cold expression, Gray tilted his head slightly and dodged the long spear that was thrusting at him. At this moment, the swords that came from the left and right had already arrived in front of Gray. Clang! The sound of a weapon being unsheathed rang out. Then, a bluish-white sword light flashed twice in succession. Poo-pee-you! Blood suddenly burst out from the throats of the two men wielding swords at Gray, and the look in their eyes suddenly became sluggish. Gray, who had killed the two men with a single slash, had already taken a step forward. He arrived in front of the man wielding the spear and slashed at him with his sword. Pooh! The man wielding the spear was split into two halves along with the handle of his spear and his body. Blood splattered everywhere. Two swords slid across the throats of two mercenaries. Taking a step forward, one mercenary was split into two halves along with his spear. A total of 4 movements, but in the eyes of an outsider, it was all in a flash. In a flash, 3 of their companions had already died. The dozens of mercenaries who were besieging Gray were all shocked, but it was followed by extreme anger. Revenge for their companions. The powerful strength that Gray displayed not only did not frighten them, but instead aroused their ferocity. So what if the opponent was strong? They had dozens of people. Even if it was a flurry of swords, they could still kill the opponent. Swish, swish. Weapons were attacking Gray from all 4 directions. Unless Gray had wings, he would definitely not be able to dodge. Gray indeed did not have wings. He also cannot fly, so he cannot dodge. However, he was a ferocious blood warrior. Ding, 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 ding. No less than 10 weapons landed on Gray's body, but only the sound of metal colliding could be heard. With the defensive characteristics of the shadow snake, his body's defense was extremely strong. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had copper skin and iron bones. When these weapons slashed at his body, it was as if they were slashing at real metal. Pooh! Allowing these weapons to slash at his body, Gray swung his sword in all directions. Poo-pee-you-pee-you. Not a single mercenary was able to block Gray's sword. Some of the mercenaries were even split into 2 halves along with their weapons. Pata-pata. The sound of people falling to the ground was heard at almost the same time. Gray's surroundings, which had been tightly surrounded, were now empty because of the deaths of these people. Ah, devil, devil. More than 10 of their companions had died so tragically. The giant crocodile mercenary team, who were originally surrounding the perimeter and ready to support their companions at any time, all turned pale. They were indeed used to seeing death. The deaths of 3 of their companions had stimulated their bloodlust. However, when they saw how strong their opponent was and that he was no longer someone that could be defeated by numbers, they finally broke down. They turned around and fled in all directions. Unfortunately, Gray was never a kind person. Since they had become enemies, there was no reason for him to let them go. Swish, swish, swish. Gray's figure flickered continuously. Every time he flickered, he would appear in front of a large mercenary team and kill him with a single slash. This caused the fleeing mercenaries to be filled with despair and fear. Stop! There were more than 10 mercenaries, but only a few were left after Gray killed them.